Wyoming Territory, July 1883. The rain fell in sheets, turning the dirt road into a river of mud. Lightning split the sky momentarily, illuminating the lone figure of a woman stumbling through the darkness. Sarah Winters clutched her small bag to her chest, protecting it from the downpour. Her blue cotton dress, once crisp and proper, now hung heavy and sodden against her thin frame. Mud caked her boots up to the ankles, each step a battle against the earth itself. She glanced over her shoulder, eyes wide with fear. The stagecoach attack had happened so quickly, rough men on horseback, bandanas covering their faces, guns drawn. The driver and other passengers had been held at gunpoint, but in the chaos, Sarah had managed to slip away unnoticed, sliding down a ravine and into the darkness. Now she was alone, miles from anywhere, with only the vague knowledge that Red Bluff lay somewhere to the north. "Keep moving," she whispered to herself, the words lost in the rumble of thunder. "Just keep moving." Her fingers tightened around the bag, feeling the hard outline of the silver pocket watch inside her father's watch, with a faded photograph tucked within its case. It was all she had left of him, of her past life. That, and the fear that Alexander Reed, the man who had taken everything else, would find her. Lightning flashed again. Sarah caught a glimpse of something in the distance, a structure of some kind. Hope surged through her, giving her legs new strength. She pushed forward, focusing on that promise of shelter. The world tilted suddenly. Her exhausted legs gave way, and she felt herself falling, the mud rising to meet her. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was another flash of lightning, and in it, the silhouette of a man. Warmth. That was the first sensation that returned to Sarah as consciousness slowly crept back. Warmth and the crackling sound of a fire. Her eyes fluttered open to a rough-hewn wooden ceiling, shadows dancing across the beams. She lay on a narrow bed, covered with a worn quilt that smelled of pine and wood smoke. Panic seized her chest. She sat up too quickly, head-spinning eyes darting around the unfamiliar room. "You're safe." The voice came from across the small cabin. A man sat in a wooden chair by the fire, his features half hidden in shadow. He didn't move toward her, maintaining his distance, as if sensing her fear. "Where am I?" Sarah's voice sounded strange to her own ears, hoarse and weak. "My cabin. About 5 miles outside Red Bluff." He shifted slightly, moving into the firelight. "Found you collapsed on the road." Sarah took in the man before her. He was perhaps in his early 30s, with broad shoulders and a lean, weathered face. His hair was dark, streaked with the first threads of silver at the temples, and his eyes, they were a striking blue-gray, the color of a winter sky. He wore simple clothes, a worn flannel shirt, canvas pants, boots that had seen better days. A slight limp was evident as he stood and moved toward the stove. "Name's Noah Sullivan," he said, pouring steaming liquid into a tin cup. "You've been out for a few hours." Sarah's hand instinctively went to her side, searching for her bag. Panic flared again when she couldn't find it. "Your bag's there," Noah said, nodding toward a small table beside the bed. "I didn't look through it, just set it aside to get you dry." Relief washed over her as she confirmed the bag was indeed there, the outline of the pocket watch still evident within. She glanced down at herself, suddenly aware that she was wearing an oversized shirt rather than her mud-soaked dress. "Mrs. Holloway from the next homestead over helped with that," Noah said, correctly interpreting her concern. "Your dress is hanging to dry. Should be ready by morning." He approached cautiously, extending the cup of tea. "You should drink this. Help get the chill out." Sarah hesitated, then accepted the cup, wrapping her fingers around its warmth. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. Just Noah is fine." He returned to his chair, giving her space. You got a name? She considered lying, inventing a new identity, but something in those steady gray-blue eyes made her decide against it. Sarah. Sarah Winters. Noah nodded, not pressing for more information. You were headed to Red Bluff. Yes, I have a position at the boarding house there. With Eleanor Holbrook. A hint of a smile touched his lips. She runs a tight ship, but she's fair. Thunder crashed outside, making the windows rattle. Noah flinched, a quick, involuntary movement, his hand gripping the arm of the chair so tightly his knuckles whitened. He covered the reaction almost immediately, but not before Sarah noticed. The reaction was familiar to her. She'd seen it countless times during her years as a nurse. During the war, soldiers startling at sudden noises transported back to battlefields in an instant. You fought in the war, she said softly. It wasn't a question. Noah's gaze sharpened, studying her. Union, 12th Pennsylvania Volunteers. His tone held a challenge, testing her reaction. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes or the storm outside. She came from Virginia, the heart of the Confederacy. Her father had fought and died in a gray uniform. Now she sat in the cabin of a Union soldier dependent on his charity. The war's been over for 18 years, Noah added, his voice gentler now. And this isn't the East. Out here, we judge folks by what they do now, not where they came from. Sarah nodded slowly, taking a sip of the tea. It was sweet with honey warming her from within. Is that why you're out here, to leave the past behind? Something flickered in Noah's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. Partly, he said. Mostly came west with my brother after the war. Wanted to start fresh. Your brother lives nearby. Noah looked away into the flames. He died. Fever took him on the journey here. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, but Sarah could hear the grief beneath the words. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. Loss was something she understood all too well. They fell into silence, then the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the rain drumming on the roof. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, strangely enough. There was a peculiar peace in sitting quietly with this solemn man who asked no questions and expected no answers. Sarah studied him covertly. The firelight revealed more details, a scar that ran along his jawline, the slight stiffness in his left shoulder, the way he tilted his head to better hear from his right side. Battle wounds no doubt visible and invisible. You should rest, Noah said eventually. I'll sleep by the fire. We can head to Red Bluff in the morning once the storm passes. Thank you, Sarah said again, realizing how inadequate the words were for a man who had likely saved her life. For everything. Noah nodded once, then turned his attention back to the fire. Sarah lay back down, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her again was Noah's profile against the firelight, still and watchful as a sentinel. Morning came with a tentative brightness, the sun breaking through the clouds, turning the rain-washed world into a glistening landscape. Sarah stepped outside the cabin, her dress now dry but badly wrinkled. The air smelled clean and new, filled with the scent of wet pine and sage. Noah's cabin stood in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. A modest barn stood nearby, and beyond that open pasture land where a few cattle grazed. It was a humble holding but meticulously maintained. Everything had its place and purpose, much like the man himself. Noah emerged from the barn, leading a dappled gray horse. He'd changed into a clean shirt and had his hat pulled low over his eyes, shielding them from the morning sun. Horse can carry two, he said by way of greeting. We should reach Red Bluff by midday. Sarah nodded, smoothing her hands over her crumpled dress self-consciously. I must look a fright. You look fine. Noah said the words simple but somehow reassuring. He offered his hand to help her mount, then swung up behind her with surprising grace, despite his limp. They rode in silence for a time, following a narrow trail that wound through pine forests and open meadows. The Wyoming landscape stretched vast and wild around them, a patchwork of green and gold beneath an endless blue sky. It was beautiful in its emptiness, so different from the crowded streets of St. Louis or the manicured farmlands of Virginia. "It's breathtaking," Sarah murmured, almost to herself. "It grows on you," Noah replied. "Took me a while to see it. All that open space felt exposing at first." Sarah understood. After the war, after all she'd lost, she too had felt exposed, vulnerable. "How long have you been here?" 8 years now. Noah guided the horse around a fallen tree. "Came with my brother Thomas in '75. He was just a boy, then barely 17. And he died on the journey." Noah was quiet for a moment. "Not exactly. We made it here, started building the cabin. He took sick that first winter. Pneumonia. Doctor couldn't do much." The pain in his voice was palpable even after all these years. Sarah didn't press further. She knew too well how grief could linger, a wound that never fully healed. They crested a hill, and Noah reined the horse to a stop. Below them lay a small cemetery, just a cluster of wooden crosses on a gentle slope overlooking a creek. "Mind if we stop a moment?" Noah asked, already dismounting. Sarah nodded, allowing him to help her down. She followed him through the simple gate, watching as he made his way to a grave marked with a wooden cross. Noah removed his hat, standing bareheaded in the morning light, and placed a wild daisy on the small mound. The grave was tiny, a child's grave. The wooden cross bore a single name, Thomas. "Your brother was just a child?" Sarah asked softly. Noah shook his head. "This isn't my brother. This was his son. Born on the trail west. My brother's buried in the town cemetery." His voice was tight with emotion. "The baby only lived 6 months." Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her. She reached out, steadying herself against a nearby headstone. For a moment, she was back in that abandoned train station during the storm, cradling her own lifeless child, a son who never drew breath long enough to be named. "Sarah." Noah was beside her, concern in his eyes. "You all right?" She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The walls she'd built around that memory were crumbling, and she feared she might crumble with them. Noah didn't touch her, but his presence was solid grounding. "Let's get you back on the horse," he said quietly. "You've been through a lot." He helped her mount again, his hands respectful, his manner gentle. As they rode away from the cemetery, Sarah felt Noah's gaze on her, thoughtful and assessing. But still, he asked no questions, demanded no explanations. They rode on toward Red Bluff, each carrying their private griefs in silence. Red Bluff was hardly more than a cluster of wooden buildings straddling the banks of a shallow river. A main street ran through its center, lined with the essential businesses of frontier life: a general store, a smithy, a saloon, a small church, and at the eastern edge a 2-story clapboard building with peeling white paint, the boarding house. People stopped to watch as Noah and Sarah rode in curious eyes, following their progress. A small town's lifeblood was gossip, and a bedraggled woman arriving on the same horse as the reclusive Noah Sullivan would provide fodder for days. "News travels fast here," Noah said quietly as they approached the boarding house. "Might want to have a story ready." Sarah nodded, understanding his meaning. "I was caught in the storm and you offered shelter. Nothing more to tell." Noah's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Simple works best." He dismounted first, then reached up to help Sarah down. His hands were warm and calloused, strong, but careful. For a brief moment, they stood close, and Sarah could see the flecks of darker blue in his gray eyes, like a storm gathering at sea. The boarding-house door opened before either could speak again. A woman stood framed in the doorway, tall and straight-backed, despite her years. Her steel-gray hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her black dress, though plain, was immaculate. Her sharp eyes took in the scene before her, missing nothing. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice crisp, "this is a surprise." "Mrs. Holbrook," Noah nodded respectfully. "Bringing your new boarder, Sarah Winters. Stage got held up by bandits last night, and she got separated in the chaos. Found her on the road during the storm." Eleanor Holbrook's gaze shifted to Sarah, assessing her from head to toe. Sarah fought the urge to fidget under that penetrating stare. "Miss Winters," Mrs. Holbrook said finally, "we expected you yesterday. I was beginning to wonder if you'd changed your mind." "No, ma'am," Sarah replied. "I'm grateful for the position." Mrs. Holbrook stepped aside, gesturing for Sarah to enter. "Well, come in then. We've much to discuss, and you look like you could use a proper meal and a bath." Sarah turned to Noah, suddenly reluctant to leave the quiet safety of his presence. "Thank you again, Mr. Sullivan. I'm in your debt." Noah touched the brim of his hat. "No debt owed, Miss Winters. Just glad you're safe." He hesitated, then added, "If you need anything, my place isn't far." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. Sarah watched him go, a solitary figure against the vast Wyoming sky, before following Mrs. Holbrook into the boarding house. The interior was clean and orderly, if somewhat austere. A narrow hallway led past a dining room where a large table was set for the evening meal. The walls were adorned with a few faded photographs and a cross-stitched sampler that read, "The Lord is my shepherd." Mrs. Holbrook led Sarah upstairs to a small room at the back of the house. It contained a narrow bed, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small wardrobe, and a chair by the window that overlooked the back garden. "This will be your room," Mrs. Holbrook said. "You'll be expected to keep it tidy. Meals are at 6 noon and 6 again. Sundays are half-days. You'll be free after the midday meal." She paused, studying Sarah with those penetrating eyes. "Mr. Sullivan said bandits." Sarah nodded, setting her bag on the bed. "Yes, ma'am. They stopped the stage about 10 miles out. In the confusion, I slipped away and ran." "Wise of you," Mrs. Holbrook said, "though risky. Those hills are no place for a woman alone." She tilted her head slightly. "And Noah Sullivan found you, did he?" There was something in her tone that made Sarah look up sharply. "Yes, he was very kind." "Kind isn't a word most would use for Noah Sullivan," Mrs. Holbrook said. "Decent, yes. Honorable, certainly. But he keeps to himself. Hardly speaks to anyone unless necessary." She smoothed her apron with practiced hands. "Still, he's been good to this town in his quiet way. Helps when needed, asks for nothing." Sarah thought of the man who had given her shelter, who had stood by his nephew's grave with such quiet grief, who had flinched at thunder but faced the storm anyway. "He seems complicated." "Most who survive wars are," Mrs. Holbrook said cryptically. "Now, get yourself cleaned up. There's water in the pitcher, and I'll have one of the girls bring up a hot bath later. You'll start work tomorrow, laundry and linens first, then we'll see what else you're good for." With that, she left, closing the door firmly behind her. Sarah sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. She opened her bag with trembling hands, checking that the pocket watch was still safely inside. It was its silver case, tarnished but intact. She opened it carefully, revealing the photograph within a handsome man in his 40s, with kind eyes and a serious expression. Her father, as he had looked before the war took him. "I made it, Papa," she whispered to the image. "I'm safe for now." But even as she said the words, she wondered how long that safety would last. Alexander Reed was not a man who gave up easily. He had resources, connections. He would be looking for her. Sarah closed the watch and tucked it beneath her pillow. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a new life to build. But for tonight, she would rest grateful for the shelter of four walls and the memory of kind gray-blue eyes that asked no questions. Noah Sullivan rode home slowly, his thoughts preoccupied with the woman he'd left at the boarding house. There was something about Sarah Winters that tugged at him, something beyond her obvious beauty or the mystery of her circumstances. Perhaps it was the shadows in her eyes, shadows he recognized all too well, the kind that came from seeing too much, losing too much. His cabin seemed emptier somehow when he returned, the silence more pronounced. Noah hadn't realized how accustomed he'd grown to solitude until someone briefly shared his space. He unsaddled his horse and tended to the few cattle he kept moving through the familiar routine with practiced efficiency. Physical labor was a balm, requiring no thought, leaving his mind free to wander. The woman was running from something, that much was clear. The fear in her eyes when she first woke, the way she clutched her bag. Her reaction at the cemetery. She carried wounds as surely as he did, though hers seemed fresher, the edges still raw. Noah shook his head, annoyed with himself. Sarah Winters was none of his concern now. She was safely delivered to Red Bluff, to Eleanor Holbrook's capable hands. His duty was done. And yet, as he moved about his cabin that evening, preparing his solitary meal, his eyes kept straying to the bed where she had slept, to the cup she had used, to the empty chair across from his. "Fool," he muttered to himself, stirring the beans cooking on the stove. 8 years out here, and you've forgotten how to act around people. But it wasn't people in general that occupied his thoughts. It was one person in particular with tired eyes and a spine made of steel beneath her fragile appearance. Outside, the last light faded from the sky, leaving the world in darkness. Noah lit his lamp and settled in his chair with a book, though the words blurred before his eyes, unread. Instead, he found himself listening to the night sounds, the hoot of an owl, the distant howl of a coyote, the creak of the cabin settling, and underneath it all, the whisper of memories, his brother's laugh, the cry of a baby in the night, the thunder of cannon fire, and now the soft voice of a woman saying his name. Noah closed the book and rubbed his eyes. It would be a long night. Sarah's first weeks at the boarding house passed in a blur of hard work and adjustment to her new life. Mrs. Holbrook ran her establishment with military precision, expecting perfection in every task. Sheets must be folded just so, floors scrubbed until they shone, meals served promptly and cleared efficiently. Sarah threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction it provided. She rose before dawn, each day worked until her muscles ached, and fell into bed each night, too exhausted to dream. It was in its way a kind of peace. The boarding house hosted a variety of guests, traveling salesmen, land speculators, the occasional family passing through to points further west. Sarah kept her head down, did her work, and avoided unnecessary conversation. The less people remembered about her, the safer she would be. Mrs. Holbrook, for her part, seemed satisfied with Sarah's performance. She wasn't a woman given to praise, but the fact that she gradually entrusted Sarah with more responsibilities, ordering supplies, managing the accounts, even cooking, when the regular cook was ill, spoke volumes. "You've education," Mrs. Holbrook observed one evening as they sat in her small office going over the ledgers. "More than most who come through here." Sarah tensed, careful not to reveal too much. "My father believed in education for women." Mrs. Holbrook peered at her over her spectacles. "You were a teacher before, weren't you? Or something similar?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. There was no point denying it. Her handwriting and arithmetic skills had already given her away. "Yes, in St. Louis." "And what brings a teacher from St. Louis to a backwater like Red Bluff?" Mrs. Holbrook's tone was conversational, but her eyes were sharp. "A desire for change," Sarah said, the practiced half-truth coming easily. "The city was stifling." Mrs. Holbrook studied her for a long moment, then turned her attention back to the ledgers. "Well, you do good work, whatever your reasons for being here. That's what matters in the end." Sarah relaxed slightly, grateful for the older woman's discretion. As the days passed, she began to understand that there was more to Eleanor Holbrook than her stern exterior suggested. The woman was observant, intelligent, and possessed of a quiet compassion that showed itself in unexpected ways: an extra blanket left on a cold night, a rare book loaned without comment, a day's rest granted when Sarah's exhaustion became too apparent. There were times, too, when Sarah caught Mrs. Holbrook looking at the photographs that hung in the hallway, faded images of a man and 2 children, a family long gone. In those unguarded moments, the older woman's face softened, revealing the grief she usually kept hidden behind her brisk efficiency. Sarah wondered about those photographs, about the story behind them, but she never asked. Just as Mrs. Holbrook respected her privacy, Sarah respected hers. In a small town where everyone knew everyone's business, such mutual discretion was a precious commodity. And so July turned to August, and Sarah settled into a routine that, if not happy, was at least stable. She had a roof over her head, honest work, and a measure of anonymity. It was more than she had dared hope for when she fled St. Louis. But at night, alone in her small room, she would sometimes take out her father's pocket watch and look at his photograph, wondering if she would ever truly feel safe again, if the fear that lived in her chest would ever subside. And sometimes when sleep eluded her, she would think of Noah Sullivan, of his quiet strength, his unasked questions, the gentleness in hands that had clearly known violence. She wondered if he too lay awake in his cabin miles away, haunted by memories he couldn't escape. The news came on a Tuesday, carried by a drummer who stopped at the boarding house on his way to Cheyenne. Sarah was serving lunch when she overheard him speaking to another guest. "Nasty business in Fort Laramie," the drummer said, buttering a roll. "Gentlemen asking all sorts of questions about a young schoolteacher from St. Louis, offering a reward for information." Sarah's hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the coffee pot. She forced herself to keep moving to appear normal, even as panic clawed at her throat. "What kind of questions?" the other guest asked a land speculator who had been staying at the boarding house for nearly a week. Where she might have gone, who she might be traveling with. Said she stole something valuable from him. The drummer shrugged. "Handsome fellow, well-dressed. Had a letter from some bank in St. Louis, seemed official enough." "Did he say who he was looking for specifically?" the speculator pressed. "A Miss Sarah Winters, schoolteacher, mid-20s, brown hair. Said she was his fiancée, that she'd had some kind of breakdown and run off." The coffee pot slipped from Sarah's numb fingers, crashing to the floor. Hot coffee splashed her skirts and the polished wood floor, drawing every eye in the dining room. "Miss Winters," Mrs. Holbrook's voice cut through the sudden silence. "Whatever is the matter?" Sarah stared at the spreading puddle of coffee, unable to speak, unable to move. Alexander had found her trail. He was coming for her. "Miss Winters is feeling unwell," Mrs. Holbrook said, firmly taking charge of the situation. "Mr. Peterson, would you be so kind as to fetch a mop from the kitchen? Miss Winters, you will go upstairs and rest." I'll have Betsy bring you some tea." Somehow Sarah found herself in her room, though she had no memory of climbing the stairs. She paced the small space, mind racing. She would have to leave tonight, before the drummer had a chance to report back to Alexander that he'd found her. But where would she go? She had little money saved, and traveling alone as a woman was dangerous at the best of times. A soft knock at the door interrupted her panicked thoughts. Mrs. Holbrook entered without waiting for a response, carrying a tray with tea and some toast. She set it on the small table by the window, then turned to face Sarah, her expression unreadable. "Sit down, Miss Winters," she said, gesturing to the chair. "You look like you're about to faint." Sarah sank into the chair, her legs no longer able to support her. Mrs. Holbrook poured tea into a cup and handed it to her. "Now," the older woman said, settling on the edge of the bed, "I think it's time you told me what you're running from." Sarah stared at her, caught between fear and the desperate need to confide in someone. "Yes, I know you're running," Mrs. Holbrook continued. "I've seen enough frightened women in my time to recognize the signs. And that reaction downstairs tells me that whoever's looking for you isn't someone you want to find you." Sarah's hands shook as she set down the teacup. "I can't. I should leave. Tonight, I've put you in enough danger already." "Nonsense," Mrs. Holbrook said firmly. "No one's going anywhere tonight. That drummer won't be leaving until morning, which gives us time to think." She leaned forward, her stern face softening slightly. "Sarah, I can't help you if I don't know what we're dealing with." Perhaps it was the use of her first name, or perhaps it was simply that she had carried her burden alone for too long. But Sarah found herself telling Mrs. Holbrook everything about Alexander Reed, the charming banker who had courted her in St. Louis, about their engagement and how he had gradually gained control over her finances, about discovering that he had embezzled not only her small inheritance, but funds from the school where she taught, about his rage when confronted the threats, the violence that had left her with bruises hidden beneath her high collars. "He said no one would believe me," Sarah finished, her voice barely above a whisper. "That he would tell everyone I was the thief, that I was unstable, and they would believe him. He's respected, influential. I'm just a woman with no family, no connections." Mrs. Holbrook had listened without interruption, her face growing harder with each revelation. Now she stood smoothing her skirts with a decisive gesture. "Well," she said, "it seems to me that Mr. Reed is about to discover that his influence doesn't extend to Red Bluff, Wyoming." Sarah looked up, startled by the steel in the older woman's voice. "What do you mean?" "I mean, my dear, that you are not without protectors here." Mrs. Holbrook's eyes glinted with determination. "You will stay in this room tomorrow. I'll tell everyone you've taken ill. When that drummer asks about you, and he will, I'll say you've moved on to Cheyenne, took the stage 2 days ago." "But what if Alexander comes himself?" "He won't be easily fooled." "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." Mrs. Holbrook moved to the door. "For now, rest. I have some arrangements to make." She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "Sarah, have you ever considered that perhaps you weren't the only victim of Mr. Reed's schemes, that there might be others who would gladly see him brought to justice?" Before Sarah could respond, Mrs. Holbrook was gone, leaving her alone with that startling possibility. Had there been others before her, it seemed likely, given Alexander's practiced charm, his careful manipulations. The thought both chilled and strengthened her. She was not alone in her suffering, not unique in her shame. Sarah moved to the window, looking out at the dusty main street of Red Bluff. The town had become a sanctuary of sorts these past weeks, a place where she could almost imagine building a new life. The thought of leaving filled her with a sadness that surprised her. Her gaze drifted to the hills beyond the town, where Noah Sullivan's cabin lay hidden among the pines. She wondered what he would say if he knew her story, if he would look at her differently, with pity perhaps, or worse, with the same doubt Alexander had predicted. The sun was setting, painting the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah watched as the light faded as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it. She had survived this far. She would find a way to go on. With that resolution, she turned from the window and began to prepare for bed, unaware that events were already in motion that would change the course of her life once more. Noah Sullivan rarely came to town. He ordered his supplies in bulk, had little need for social interaction, and generally preferred the solitude of his cabin to the bustle of Red Bluff. But on this particular Wednesday, in mid-August, a broken plow blade had forced his hand. He tied his horse outside the blacksmith's shop, nodding a greeting to the smith, a burly man named Hansen, who was one of the few people in town Noah considered something close to a friend. "Sullivan," Hansen said, wiping his hands on his apron. "Been wondering when you'd show your face again. What brings you down from the mountain?" Noah held up the broken plow blade. "Need this fixed if I'm going to get a fall garden in." Hansen took the blade, examining the break. "Can do. Take about a day, though. Got a few jobs ahead of you." "That's fine," Noah said. "I'll pick it up tomorrow." "You staying in town tonight?" Noah shook his head. "I'll ride back, come again tomorrow." Hansen gave him a knowing look. "Might want to stop by the boarding house before you go. Eleanor Holbrook was asking after you yesterday." Noah frowned. "What for?" "Didn't say. But you know Eleanor wouldn't ask without reason." Noah considered this information. Eleanor Holbrook wasn't a woman given to idle curiosity. If she wanted to see him, it was for a purpose. "I'll stop by," he said, though the prospect of entering the boarding house of potentially seeing Sarah Winters again filled him with an unease he couldn't quite name. He spent the next hour taking care of other errands, purchasing supplies at the general store, mailing a letter at the post office, checking for any news from back east. All the while he was aware of the curious glances from townsfolk, unaccustomed to seeing the reclusive Noah Sullivan in their midst. Finally, he could delay no longer. He made his way to the boarding house, its white clapboard exterior gleaming in the afternoon sun. Before he could knock, the door opened, revealing Eleanor Holbrook herself, as if she had been watching for him. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her tone indicating she had expected him. "Please come in." Noah removed his hat as he stepped into the cool interior of the house. The dining room was empty. The lunch service long concluded the tables set for the evening meal. "Mrs. Holbrook," he said, feeling awkward in the formal setting. "Hansen said you wanted to see me." "Yes." She gestured for him to follow her to her small office at the back of the house. Once inside, she closed the door and turned to face him, her expression grave. "It's about Miss Winters." Noah's heart quickened, though he kept his face neutral. "What about her?" "She's in trouble," Mrs. Holbrook said bluntly. "A man is looking for her, a dangerous man from her past. He's already sent people asking questions in Fort Laramie, and it's only a matter of time before he comes here." Noah's jaw tightened. "What kind of trouble?" Mrs. Holbrook gave him a measured look as if deciding how much to reveal. "The kind that leaves bruises under high collars, Mr. Sullivan. The kind that makes a woman flee hundreds of miles with nothing but the clothes on her back." A cold anger settled in Noah's chest, familiar and unwelcome. He had seen too much violence against the vulnerable, both during the war and after. "What can I do?" "She needs somewhere safe to stay, somewhere no one would think to look for her." Mrs. Holbrook held his gaze steadily. "I thought of you." Noah blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the request. "My cabin." "Yes, it's isolated, defensible, and you're more than capable of protecting her if necessary." She paused, then added, "And she trusts you, though God knows why. She's hardly spoken to anyone since she arrived, but she mentions you." Noah wasn't sure how to process this information. The idea of sharing his small cabin with Sarah Winters, of disrupting the solitary life he had built so carefully, was unsettling. And yet the thought of her in danger, afraid, stirred something protective in him that he had thought long buried. "When?" he asked finally. "Tonight, if possible. A drummer staying here has been asking questions. I've told him she's gone to Cheyenne, but I don't know if he believes me." Noah nodded slowly. "I'll need to prepare a place for her." "She doesn't need luxury, Mr. Sullivan. She needs safety." Mrs. Holbrook's voice softened slightly. "I wouldn't ask this of you if I had another option. But there's something about this man she's running from, the way she speaks of him. He's not someone who gives up easily." "I understand." And he did. Some men were like wolves. Once they had the scent of prey, they would follow it relentlessly. "Have her ready after dark. I'll come around the back way." Relief flickered across Mrs. Holbrook's face. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan." Noah replaced his hat, preparing to leave. "One more thing," he said, pausing at the door. "Does she know about this plan?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure you would agree before I told her." Noah nodded. "Make sure she knows it's her choice. I won't have her feel forced into anything." With that, he left his mind already working through the practical details of what needed to be done. His cabin would need rearranging supplies, would need to be gathered, precautions taken. And all the while, he tried not to think too deeply about what it would mean to have Sarah Winters in his home under his protection, her presence disrupting the careful isolation he had maintained for so long. As he rode back to his cabin, the Wyoming landscape stretched around him, vast and indifferent to human concerns. The afternoon sun beat down on his shoulders, and the wind carried the scent of sage and pine. It was a good land, a healing land. Perhaps it could offer Sarah Winters the same peace it had eventually granted him. Or perhaps, he thought with a grim smile, he was a fool to think that peace was anything but temporary, a brief respite, before the world's violence found them once again. Sarah was folding linens in the small back room of the boarding house when Mrs. Holbrook found her late that afternoon. The older woman closed the door behind her, an unusual action that immediately put Sarah on alert. "Is something wrong?" Sarah asked, setting aside the sheet she had been folding. "Not wrong exactly," Mrs. Holbrook said. "But we need to move quickly. That drummer has been asking too many questions, and I don't like the way he's been watching the house." Fear fluttered in Sarah's chest. "You think he knows I'm still here?" "I think we can't take the chance." Mrs. Holbrook moved to the window, checking that the curtains were drawn. "I've made arrangements for you to stay somewhere safer, at least until we know whether this Mr. Reed of yours is coming himself." "Where?" Sarah asked, though she already had a suspicion. "Noah Sullivan's cabin." Mrs. Holbrook turned to face her, expression serious. "It's isolated, difficult to find, unless you know where to look. And Noah is capable of handling trouble should it arise." Sarah's mind raced. The thought of returning to Noah's cabin brought a confusing mix of emotions: relief at the prospect of safety, anxiety at the intimacy such an arrangement would entail, and underneath it all, a strange anticipation she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "Does Mr. Sullivan know about this plan?" she asked. "He suggested it," Mrs. Holbrook said, though Sarah suspected this wasn't entirely true. "He'll come for you after dark around the back way. Pack only what you absolutely need. One bag, nothing that will slow you down." Sarah nodded, already mentally cataloging her few possessions. "How long will I need to stay?" That depends on what we learn about Mr. Reed's movements. Mrs. Holbrook's face softened slightly. I have some contacts in St. Louis who might be able to discover more about his situation there. It's possible that you're not the only one looking to avoid his attention. This was a new thought, that Alexander might have legal troubles of his own, that he might be vulnerable in ways she hadn't considered. It was a small hope, but Sarah clung to it nonetheless. "Thank you," she said, meeting Mrs. Holbrook's gaze directly, "for believing me, for helping me." Something flickered in the older woman's eyes, a shadow of old pain quickly masked. "Let's just say I recognize the look of someone who's been betrayed by those who should have protected them." She straightened, resuming her usual brisk manner. "Now finish those linens, then go pack. And remember, 1 bag essentials only." Sarah did as she was told, her movements automatic, while her mind whirled with possibilities. By the time evening fell, she had packed her small bag with an extra dress, undergarments, her few toiletries, and of course, her father's pocket watch. Everything else could be replaced if necessary. She sat on her bed waiting as the boarding house settled into its nighttime routine, dinner served and cleared, guests retiring to their rooms, the kitchen staff departing for their own homes. Through her window, she could see the stars emerging in the darkening sky, bright pinpoints in the vastness of the Wyoming night. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Holbrook entered carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Some extra food," she explained, handing the package to Sarah. "And this." She produced a small revolver from her pocket, a lady's gun with a pearl handle. "Do you know how to use it?" Sarah took the weapon gingerly. "My father taught me the basics during the war." "Good. It's loaded 5 rounds. Keep it with you." Mrs. Holbrook's expression was grim. "I hope you won't need it, but better to have it and not need it." Another knock, this one at the back door downstairs. Mrs. Holbrook nodded. "That'll be Noah. Come quickly now." They descended the back stairs, moving quietly through the darkened kitchen. Mrs. Holbrook opened the door to reveal Noah Sullivan, a dark silhouette against the night sky. He wore his usual clothes with the addition of a long duster coat and a gun belt at his hip. "Evening," he said softly, his eyes moving from Mrs. Holbrook to Sarah. "Ready." Sarah nodded, clutching her bag and the food bundle. Mrs. Holbrook handed her a dark shawl. "Wrap this around your head," she instructed, "less noticeable in the dark." Sarah did as she was told, then turned to Mrs. Holbrook. "I don't know how to thank you." "Stay alive," the older woman said bluntly. "That'll be thanks enough." She looked at Noah. "Take care of her, Sullivan." Noah nodded once, a silent promise. Then he took Sarah's bag, his hand briefly touching hers in the process. "This way," he said, gesturing toward the shadows of the back alley. Sarah followed him, her heart pounding with fear. And something else, a strange exhilaration at taking action, at fighting back, in her own way, against the man who had tried to destroy her. They moved through the back alleys of Red Bluff, like ghosts, avoiding the main street, with its saloon lights and occasional late-night pedestrians. Noah's horse waited at the edge of town, tethered in a small grove of cottonwoods. "We'll ride double until we're clear of town," Noah said, securing her bag to the saddle. "Then I have another horse waiting at Hanson's place just outside town." Sarah nodded, allowing him to help her mount. His hands were strong and sure at her waist, lifting her effortlessly onto the horse's back. He swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins. They rode in silence, the horse's hooves muffled in the soft dirt of the trail. The night was clear, the stars and a quarter moon providing enough light to see by. Sarah was acutely aware of Noah's presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the subtle shifts of his body, As he guided the horse, the faint scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. When they reached Hanson's small homestead at the edge of town, Noah dismounted and helped Sarah down. A second horse waited already, saddled a steady-looking bay mare with a white blaze on her forehead. "Hanson's letting us borrow her," Noah explained, adjusting the stirrups to fit Sarah's shorter legs. "Thought you might be more comfortable on your own mount for the ride to the cabin." The consideration touched Sarah. "Thank you." Noah just nodded, busy transferring her bag to the mare's saddle. "She's gentle but responsive. You've ridden before?" "Yes, though it's been some time." "It'll come back to you." He helped her mount, then checked the saddle one last time. "Stay close behind me. The trail gets narrow in places." They set off again, leaving the lights of Red Bluff behind, venturing into the vast darkness of the Wyoming night. The trail wound through pine forests and open meadows, climbing gradually into the foothills. Sarah found her riding skills returning as Noah had predicted, and she began to relax into the mare's steady pace. After perhaps an hour, they crested a rise, and Noah reined in his horse, waiting for Sarah to draw alongside him. Below them, nestled in a small valley, was his cabin, a square of deeper darkness against the night landscape. "Home," Noah said simply, and there was something in his voice, a mix of pride and resignation, that made Sarah glance at him. His profile was stark in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for doing this," she said softly. "For taking me in." Noah turned to look at her, his eyes silver in the moonlight. "Everyone deserves a safe place, Miss Winters." There was a weight to his words that suggested he understood more than he let on, that perhaps he, too, had once needed sanctuary. Before Sarah could respond, he nudged his horse forward, leading the way down to the cabin. The interior was just as Sarah remembered it, simple, clean, organized with military precision. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the sparse furnishings. What was different was the addition of a canvas partition at the far end of the main room, creating a separate sleeping area. "Made some adjustments," Noah said, following her gaze. "Thought you might want some privacy." The thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Sarah off guard. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Noah shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude as always. "It's nothing, just a sheet on a rope." He took her bag and placed it near the partitioned area. "You take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." Sarah wanted to protest, to insist that she shouldn't displace him from his own bed, but something in his expression stopped her. This arrangement was clearly important to him, a matter of honor perhaps, or simply his way of ensuring her comfort. "I'll make us some tea," Noah said, moving to the stove. "You must be tired after the ride." Sarah sank into a chair by the fire, suddenly aware of the exhaustion pulling at her limbs. The events of the day, the fear, the hasty preparations, the tense ride through the darkness, had drained her more than she realized. Noah worked quietly, heating water, preparing 2 cups. His movements were efficient, economical, those of a man accustomed to caring for himself. Yet there was a gentleness to his actions, too, a consideration that belied his gruff exterior. "Here," he said, offering her a steaming cup. "It'll help you sleep." Sarah accepted the cup, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Do you think I'll be safe here?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Noah settled in the chair opposite her, his own cup cradled in his large hands. "As safe as anyone can be," he said honestly. "The cabin's hard to find unless you know where to look. We have good sight lines from here, can see anyone approaching from a fair distance. And I'm a light sleeper." The corner of his mouth quirked slightly. "Old habits from the war." Sarah nodded, taking a sip of the tea. It was sweetened with honey just as it had been that first night. "I never thanked you properly, did I, for finding me that night, for taking me in." "No need," Noah said, his gaze on the fire. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Sarah said with certainty born of hard experience. "Not anyone." They fell into silence, then watching the flames dance in the hearth. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. It was a peaceful sound, a reminder of the wildness beyond the cabin walls, of the vast spaces that might offer freedom as well as danger. Sarah finished her tea and stood suddenly shy. "I should get some rest." Noah nodded, not looking up from the fire. "Sleep well, Miss Winters." She moved behind the canvas partition, where she found the bed neatly made with fresh linens, a small table beside it, holding a lantern and a pitcher of water. Again she was struck by Noah's thoughtfulness, by the care he had taken to prepare for her arrival. As she changed into her nightgown and slipped beneath the covers, Sarah listened to the sounds of Noah moving about the cabin, banking the fire, checking the doors and windows, settling into his makeshift bed by the hearth. There was something deeply reassuring about his presence, about knowing that he was there, steady and watchful, between her and whatever dangers might come. For the first time since she had fled St. Louis, Sarah fell asleep without fear haunting her dreams. Dawn broke clear and cold, the first hint of autumn in the air. Noah was already up, moving quietly about the cabin, when Sarah emerged from behind the partition. She had dressed in her simplest work dress, her hair braided and pinned up neatly. "Morning," Noah said, glancing up from the stove where he was cooking something that smelled like oatmeal. "Sleep all right?" "Better than I have in months." Sarah admitted moving to help with breakfast preparations without being asked. She found plates and utensils, set them on the small table, poured water from the pitcher into 2 cups. They worked together with surprising ease, as if they had done this 100 times before. It wasn't until they were seated across from each other, the simple meal between them, that the strangeness of their situation seemed to register. "I've been thinking," Noah said, breaking the awkward silence. "Might be best if you stay close to the cabin for now, at least until we know more about who might be looking for you." Sarah nodded, understanding the wisdom of this advice, even as she chafed at the confinement. "I don't want to be a burden. There must be work I can do here." Noah considered this, his gaze thoughtful. "Plenty of work to go around," he said finally. "Garden needs tending. Preserves to put up for winter. Cabin could use a woman's touch if you've a mind for it." "I'd like that," Sarah said, surprised to find she meant it. The thought of making herself useful, of contributing to this temporary household, appealed to her sense of independence. "I'm a fair hand at cooking too, though nothing fancy. Been living on my own cooking for 8 years, Noah said, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Anything would be an improvement. They finished breakfast, and Noah showed Sarah around the cabin and its immediate surroundings, the vegetable garden, the small barn where he kept his horse, and a few chickens, the spring that provided fresh water, the shed where he stored tools and supplies. "I need to check the fence line today," he said as they returned to the cabin. "Won't be gone more than a few hours." "You'll be all right here," Sarah nodded, though the thought of being alone made her nervous. "I'll be fine." Noah seemed to sense her unease. He moved to a shelf near the door and took down a rifle, checking it before handing it to her. "You know how to use one of these." Sarah took the weapon, testing its weight. "My father taught me during the war. We lived near the border. He wanted to be sure I could protect myself if necessary." Noah nodded, satisfied. "Good. It's loaded, and there's extra ammunition in that box by the window." He paused, then added, "I don't expect trouble, but better safe than sorry." "Thank you," Sarah said, setting the rifle within easy reach. Noah hesitated, looking as if he wanted to say more, but then simply nodded and left the door, closing firmly behind him. Sarah stood in the center of the cabin, suddenly alone, with the weight of silence. It was a different kind of solitude than she had known at the boarding house, more complete, more profound. Here, there were no footsteps in the hallway, no murmur of voices from the dining room, no constant reminders of human presence. And yet, paradoxically, she felt less alone here than she had in months. Perhaps it was simply knowing that Noah would return, that she wasn't truly abandoned. Or perhaps it was the sense that in this place, with this man, she could be herself, without fear of judgment or discovery. Sarah shook off these confusing thoughts and turned her attention to the tasks at hand. The cabin was clean, but could use a woman's touch, as Noah had put it. She spent the morning sweeping, dusting, rearranging what few decorative items there were, a carved wooden box on the mantel, a faded sampler hanging by the door, a collection of books stacked neatly on a shelf. The books caught her attention, a surprising collection for a solitary rancher. There were practical volumes on animal husbandry and agriculture, as one might expect, but also novels by Dickens and Twain, poetry collections, and most surprisingly, several books on architecture and building design. Sarah ran her fingers along the spines, wondering about this hidden facet of Noah Sullivan. Was this a past interest abandoned after the war, or a current passion pursued in the solitude of long winter evenings? She was still pondering this when the door opened and Noah returned earlier than expected. He looked troubled, his jaw set in a hard line. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, instantly alert. Noah hung his hat by the door, his movements deliberate. "Riders coming up from Red Bluff. 3 of them." Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. "Alexander." "Don't know yet. They're still a ways off." Noah moved to the window, his posture tense. "Could be nothing, land speculators maybe, or lost travelers, but timing's suspicious." Sarah joined him at the window, though she couldn't see anything yet, beyond the trees that surrounded the clearing. "What should we do?" Noah considered for a moment, his eyes scanning the landscape. "No point running blind. Better to know what we're dealing with." He turned to her, his expression grave. "I want you to go to the root cellar. There's a trap door under that rug by the pantry. Stay there until I come for you." Sarah wanted to protest, to insist on facing whatever was coming alongside him, but the practical part of her knew he was right. She would be safer hidden, and Noah would be better able to handle the situation without worrying about her. "All right," she said, moving toward the trapdoor. "But be careful." Noah's expression softened slightly. "Always am." He reached for his rifle, checking it with practiced hands. "Go on now, and take this." He handed her the small revolver Mrs. Holbrook had given her, just in case. Sarah lifted the trapdoor and descended into the cool darkness of the root cellar. It was a small space lined with shelves of preserved foods and supplies. Noah closed the trapdoor above her, leaving her in near total darkness, save for the thin lines of light that filtered through the floorboards. She settled on a crate, the revolver cold in her hand, and waited, straining to hear any sound from above. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours, marked only by the steady beat of her heart and the occasional creak of the cabin's timbers. Then came the sound of hoofbeats, the whinny of horses' voices, too muffled to make out words, but masculine, authoritative. The cabin door opened, footsteps entered, and above her head a conversation began. Sarah pressed closer to the floorboards, desperate to hear, to know whether Alexander had found her at last. Noah Sullivan stood on his porch rifle, held casually but ready as the 3 riders approached his cabin. He recognized 2 of them immediately, Sheriff Daniels from Red Bluff and Franklin Thornton, the banker and largest landowner in the county. The 3rd man was a stranger, well-dressed in city clothes that looked out of place in the Wyoming wilderness. "Sullivan, Sheriff Daniels called as they drew near. "Need a word." Noah nodded, his face expressionless. "Sheriff, Mr. Thornton." He deliberately did not acknowledge the third man. The riders dismounted, tying their horses to the hitching post. Sheriff Daniels approached first, a heavy-set man with a graying mustache and shrewd eyes. He was a fair lawman in Noah's estimation, though too easily influenced by the town's wealthier residents. "This here's Mr. Reed from St. Louis," Daniels said, gesturing to the stranger. "He's looking for a young woman might have passed through these parts." Noah studied the man called Reed. He was handsome in a conventional way, with dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His clothes were expensive, his manner confident, bordering on arrogant. But it was his eyes that caught Noah's attention, cold and calculating at odds with his pleasant smile. "A lot of people pass through Red Bluff," Noah said neutrally. "Don't see many of them out this way, though." Reed stepped forward, his smile widening. "Perhaps I should explain. I'm looking for my fiancée, Miss Sarah Winters. She's a school teacher from St. Louis, suffered a nervous breakdown after the death of our child. She fled in a state of confusion, taking some family heirlooms with her." He produced a photograph from his coat pocket. "This is Sarah." Noah glanced at the photograph. It was, indeed, Sarah, though younger, her expression more carefree than he had ever seen it. He handed the photograph back without comment. "Sheriff Daniels tells me you brought a young woman to town some weeks ago," Reed continued. "A woman matching Sarah's description who's been working at the boarding house. But now she seems to have disappeared." "Found a woman on the road during a storm," Noah said, choosing his words carefully. "Took her to town to the boarding house. Haven't seen her since." Franklin Thornton, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Come now, Sullivan. We all know how isolated you keep yourself. Why would you go out of your way to help a stranger, unless there was something special about her?" Noah turned his cool gaze to Thornton. The two men had a history of mutual dislike dating back to Thornton's attempts to buy Noah's land for less than it was worth. "I don't leave people to die in storms, Thornton. Even if you might." Thornton's face reddened, but before he could respond, Sheriff Daniels intervened. "No one's accusing you of anything, Sullivan. We're just trying to find this young woman, make sure she's safe. Like I said, I haven't seen her since I took her to town." Noah kept his voice level, his face impassive. "Now, if that's all I've got work to do." Reed's pleasant expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm concerned for Sarah's well-being. She's not in her right mind. If you know where she is, you'd be doing her a kindness by telling us." Noah met Reed's gaze directly. "Don't know where she is," he said. "But I do know that people running from something usually have their reasons." A flash of anger crossed Reed's face before he controlled it. "Are you suggesting my fiancée has reason to run from me, sir?" "Not suggesting anything," Noah said calmly, "just stating a fact." Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat uncomfortably. "All right, Sullivan. If you do see her or hear anything, you'll let me know." Noah nodded once, a non-committal gesture. The three men mounted their horses, Reed casting one last suspicious glance at the cabin before they rode away. Noah watched until they disappeared into the trees, then waited several more minutes to ensure they were truly gone. Only then did he return inside and lift the trapdoor to the root cellar. Sarah sat on a crate in the dim light, the revolver clutched in her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Was it him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Noah nodded, extending a hand to help her up. "Yes, along with Sheriff Daniels and Franklin Thornton." Sarah climbed out of the cellar, her legs shaky. "Did they believe you when you said you hadn't seen me?" "Sheriff seemed to. Thornton's suspicious by nature." Noah closed the trapdoor, replacing the rug over it. "Reed's another matter. Man like that doesn't give up easily." Sarah sank into a chair, the revolver still in her hand. "What did he say about me?" Noah hesitated, not wanting to distress her further. "That you were his fiancée. That you had a breakdown after losing a child, took some family heirlooms, ran off." Sarah's laugh was bitter, edged with hysteria. "Of course. He couldn't just say, 'I stole from him,' that would raise too many questions about his own finances. So he made me out to be mad with grief." She looked up at Noah, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and pain. "There was a child, but it wasn't his. And it didn't die. It was never born alive. A stillbirth during a storm while I was alone." Noah felt a deep ache at her words, remembering his nephew's tiny grave. He sat down across from her, giving her space, but offering his presence. "I'm sorry," he said simply. Sarah wiped away a tear with an angry gesture. "It was a long time ago, almost 2 years now." She set the revolver on the table, her hand trembling slightly. "What happens now?" "They'll search the area for a while, ask questions in town." Noah considered their options. "Eventually, they'll move on. Reed can't stay away from his business in St. Louis indefinitely. But we need to be careful in the meantime." "I can't ask you to hide me forever," Sarah said. "It's too dangerous for you." Noah's expression hardened. "I've faced worse dangers, Miss Winters, and I don't like men who use their power to hurt those weaker than themselves." The vehemence in his voice surprised her. There was history there, Sarah realized, not just his own experiences in the war, but something more personal, more painful. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing me, for helping me." Noah nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude as always. He stood, moving to the window to check the trail again. "We should be safe for now. They'll likely search the areas closer to town first." Sarah joined him at the window, looking out at the landscape that had become her refuge. The afternoon sun filtered through the pines, dappling the clearing with gold. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily in the blue sky. "It's beautiful here," she said. "Peaceful." "It is," Noah agreed, his voice softening. "Took me a while to see it. When I first came, all I could think about was what I'd left behind, what I'd lost. But this land, it has a way of healing if you let it." Sarah glanced at him, struck by this rare moment of openness. "Is that why you stayed after your brother died?" Noah was quiet for a long moment. "Partly," he said finally. "And partly because leaving felt like abandoning him somehow. He loved it here, had all these plans." He trailed off, lost in memory. Sarah wanted to ask more, to understand this complex, solitary man who had risked his safety for hers. But she sensed that Noah had shared as much as he was comfortable with for now. "I should start dinner," she said instead. "After all the excitement, we could both use a good meal." Noah nodded, grateful for the change of subject. "I'll check on the animals, bring in some more firewood." They moved apart, each to their tasks, but something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding, a growing trust. And as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the clearing, Sarah found herself thinking not of the danger that had followed her, but of the strange peace she had found in this isolated cabin with a man who asked for nothing, but offered everything. It was a dangerous thought, perhaps this fragile sense of belonging. But for now, she would hold it close, a small flame, against the gathering darkness. Days passed with no sign of Alexander Reed or his companions. Each morning, Noah would ride to a high point near the cabin, scanning the surrounding countryside for any approaching riders. Each evening, he would check again, always returning with the same reassuring words, "All clear. Life settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Sarah tended the vegetable garden cooked meals that were a vast improvement over Noah's bachelor fare, and slowly added touches to the cabin that made it more comfortable: wildflowers in a jar on the table, a patchwork quilt she found in a trunk, and mended curtains made from flour sacks to soften the harsh lines of the windows. Noah went about his daily work mending fences, caring for the few cattle he kept, hunting occasionally to supplement their meals. He was often gone for hours, but Sarah found she didn't mind the solitude. There was a peace in this isolated place, a sense of safety she hadn't felt in months. In the evenings they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, each comfortable with the other's presence. Noah was teaching her to play checkers, and she discovered he had a competitive streak beneath his quiet exterior. She won as often as she lost, suspecting that he didn't let her win out of some misplaced chivalry, a quality she appreciated more than she could express. It was during one of these quiet evenings, the checkerboard between them, that Sarah finally asked the question that had been on her mind since discovering his books. "The architecture books," she said, moving a checker forward. "Were you studying to be an architect before the war?" Noah looked up, surprised by the question. His fingers hovered over his own pieces. "Yes," he said after a moment. "Was apprenticed to a firm in Philadelphia. Had plans to go to Europe, study the great buildings there." His mouth quirked in a wry smile. "Then the war came." "And after?" Sarah prompted gently. Noah moved his checker, capturing one of hers. "After, nothing seemed important for a while." He shrugged. "By the time I was ready to think about it again, too much time had passed. Firms wanted younger men, men without complications." Sarah understood what he meant by complications: his partial deafness, the limp perhaps, other wounds less visible but no less real. "So you came west with your brother?" Noah nodded. "Thomas was all the family I had left. Our parents died before the war, father in '58, mother in '60. Thomas was just a boy when I went to fight. Stayed with an aunt in Pittsburgh. He captured another of her checkers. When I came back, he hardly knew me. Took time to build that relationship again." Sarah considered her next move both on the board and in conversation. "And your brother's wife, the mother of the child in the grave?" A shadow crossed Noah's face. "Emily. Died in childbirth. The baby lived for 6 months before the fever took him too." His voice was flat, as if reciting facts from a newspaper. "Thomas was never the same after Emily died. The baby was all he had left of her. And when the baby died too, he gave up," Noah said simply. "Just gave up. The fever took him a week later." He looked away into the fire. "I sometimes think he didn't fight it, that he wanted to join them." Sarah reached across the board, touching his hand briefly. "I'm sorry, Noah." He looked down at her hand on his, then back at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. "Your move," he said quietly. Sarah withdrew her hand and returned her attention to the game, giving him time to compose himself. But something had changed between them. A deeper understanding established, another layer of reserve peeled away. Later that night, as she lay in bed behind the canvas partition, Sarah found herself thinking about Noah's losses: parents, comrades in war, brother, sister-in-law, nephew. So much grief for one man to bear. And yet, he had survived, had built a life here in this wild, beautiful place. Had found, if not happiness, then at least a measure of peace. It gave her hope that perhaps she too could build something new from the ashes of her past. That her losses, her father, her child, her reputation, her trust in others, need not define her forever. With that comforting thought, she drifted into sleep, unaware that the fragile peace they had established was soon to be shattered. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the first real hint of autumn in the air. Sarah woke early, as had become her habit, and set about making breakfast before Noah returned from his morning check of the surrounding area. She was at the stove frying bacon when she heard hoofbeats approaching faster than Noah's usual measured pace. Alarm shot through her. She moved quickly to the window, peering out cautiously. It was Noah riding hard toward the cabin. Behind him in the distance, a plume of dust suggested other riders in pursuit. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. She grabbed the rifle Noah had left for her protection and moved to the door, opening it as he dismounted in a flurry of dust. "Reed?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Noah nodded, his expression grim. "Reed and Thornton, plus 2 men I don't recognize, armed." He took the rifle from her hands. "No time to hide in the cellar. We need to move." "Where?" "There's a hunting cabin about 3 miles up in the hills. Doubt Reed knows about it." Noah was already gathering supplies, ammunition, food, canteens of water. "Get your things, just essentials." Sarah moved quickly, grabbing her bag, which she had never fully unpacked, adding a warm shawl for the cooler mountain air. She hesitated over her father's pocket watch, then tucked it securely inside her bodice, close to her heart. By the time she emerged from behind the partition, Noah had the horses ready, his own saddlebags packed. He handed her a revolver, not the small lady's gun from Mrs. Holbrook, but a heavier, more reliable weapon. "5 shots," he said. "Use them if you have to." The gravity of the situation hit Sarah fully then. This wasn't just running and hiding anymore. This was preparing for a confrontation that might turn deadly. "Noah," she began, unsure what she wanted to say. "No time." He cut her off, his voice gentle despite the urgency. "We need to move now. They're maybe 15 minutes behind us." They mounted quickly and rode away from the cabin, not on the main trail, but on a narrow deer path that wound up into the hills. Noah led the way, his posture tense, alert to any sound or movement. Sarah followed close behind, her heart pounding in time with her horse's hooves. The path climbed steadily, winding through pine forests and across small meadows bright with late summer wildflowers. Under different circumstances, Sarah might have found the journey beautiful. Now she could only focus on keeping up with Noah, on listening for sounds of pursuit. After what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, Noah held up his hand, signaling a halt. They had reached a small clearing where the trees thinned enough to provide a view of the valley below. In the distance, Sarah could see Noah's cabin, and approaching it, 4 riders. "They're searching the cabin," Noah said, his voice low. "Once they realize we're gone, they'll start looking for tracks." "Will they find this path?" "Eventually, but I've done my best to hide our trail." He turned to her, his expression serious. "We need to keep moving. The cabin's not far now." They rode on the path, growing steeper, more challenging. Sarah's mare struggled in places, forcing Noah to dismount and lead both horses through particularly difficult stretches. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its heat tempered by the cooler mountain air. Finally, they crested a ridge and descended into a small, sheltered valley. Nestled among the pines was a tiny cabin, more a shack really built of rough logs with a stone chimney. It looked abandoned, wild rose bushes growing up around its walls, the small clearing in front overgrown with grass and wildflowers. "Not much," Noah said as they approached, "but it'll do for now." The interior was a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot against one wall, a crude table and 2 chairs and shelves holding basic supplies, canned goods, lanterns, blankets, ammunition. It was dusty, but sound, the roof intact, the windows whole. "Used to come up here to hunt in the winter," Noah explained, unloading their supplies. "Haven't been here in a couple of years, but I try to keep it stocked." Sarah moved to the single window, looking out at the peaceful valley. "Do you think they'll find us here?" Noah considered the question, his expression grave. "Not right away. Trails hard to follow, and there are a lot of false paths up in these hills." He checked his rifle, a habitual gesture. "But Reed strikes me as a man who doesn't give up easily." "No," Sarah agreed softly. "He doesn't." They settled in to wait, Noah taking the first watch while Sarah tried to make the cabin more habitable. She swept the dust from the floor, wiped down the meager furnishings, and inventoried their supplies. There was enough food for perhaps a week, if they were careful, and plenty of ammunition for both rifle and revolver. As evening approached, Noah built a small fire in the fireplace, careful to use only dry wood that would produce minimal smoke. They ate a simple meal of beans and jerky, neither speaking much, both lost in their own thoughts. Night fell, bringing with it a chill that seeped through the cabin walls. Sarah wrapped her shawl more tightly around her shoulders, watching as Noah checked the perimeter one last time before returning to the cabin. "No sign of them," he reported, setting his rifle by the door. "But they're out there somewhere. I can feel it." Sarah nodded, understanding his instinct. She had felt hunted ever since fleeing St. Louis, a constant awareness of danger that never quite left her, even in moments of relative safety. "You should rest," Noah said, gesturing to the cot. "I'll take first watch." "There's only one bed," Sarah pointed out. "I've slept in worse places than a floor." He gave her a ghost of a smile. During the war, any flat surface looked like a feather bed after enough days of marching. Sarah wanted to protest, to insist they take turns with the cot, but she recognized the stubborn set of Noah's jaw. This was a matter of honor for him, and arguing would only make him uncomfortable. "Wake me for the second watch," she said instead. "I can keep lookout while you rest." Noah looked as if he might object, then nodded. "All right, in a few hours." Sarah settled on the narrow cot, pulling a rough woolen blanket over herself. From this position she could see Noah sitting by the window, his profile outlined by the faint glow of the banked fire. He looked solid, dependable, a bulwark against the dangers of the night. Despite the circumstances, despite the fear that still lurked at the edges of her consciousness, Sarah felt a peculiar contentment. Here, in this tiny cabin on a mountainside, with a virtual stranger standing guard over her sleep, she felt safer than she had in years. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. Safety was an illusion, especially for a woman alone in the world. And yet, watching Noah's steady vigilance, she allowed herself to believe in that illusion, just for tonight. Sleep claimed her eventually, a deeper, more restful sleep than she expected. And if she dreamed of a life where cabins and quiet evenings and a certain steady presence were permanent rather than temporary, she didn't remember it upon waking. Noah never did wake her for the second watch. When Sarah opened her eyes, pale morning light was filtering through the cabin's single window. Noah was still at his post, though he had moved from the window to the doorway, where he stood looking out at the new day. "You were supposed to wake me," she said, sitting up and smoothing her rumpled skirts. Noah turned, the faint light illuminating the exhaustion on his face. "You needed the rest more than I did." Sarah frowned, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the slight slump of his shoulders. "And now you need rest. I insist, Noah. You're no good to either of us if you collapse from exhaustion." A flash of surprise crossed his face at her firm tone, followed by a reluctant nod. "All right, but just for a few hours. And wake me if you see or hear anything at all." "I will," she promised, rising and moving to take his place at the door. Noah handed her the rifle, their fingers brushing in the exchange. 5 shots in the rifle plus what's in the revolver. Don't hesitate to use them if you need to. The weight of the weapon was familiar in Sarah's hands, a skill learned during the desperate days of the war when her father had insisted she know how to protect herself. I won't hesitate, she assured him. Satisfied, Noah moved to the cot, stretching out with a barely suppressed groan. He was asleep almost instantly, his breathing deep and regular, one hand still resting on the revolver at his side. Sarah took up her position by the door, rifle ready, eyes scanning the peaceful valley below the cabin. The morning was beautiful, the light golden on the autumn-touched leaves, a gentle breeze stirring the pines. It was hard to believe that danger lurked somewhere in those serene woods. As she kept watch, Sarah found her thoughts returning to the man sleeping behind her. Noah Sullivan was unlike any man she had ever known. Quiet, where others were boastful; thoughtful, where others were impulsive; gentle, where others were harsh. He had risked his safety, his home, perhaps even his life to protect her, a woman he barely knew. Why, what drove such selflessness? Was it simply his nature, or was there something more, some personal history that made him particularly sensitive to the plight of those in danger? She thought of the books on architecture, of the dreams deferred, of the losses he had endured. There was more to Noah Sullivan than met the eye layers of complexity beneath his stoic exterior. And despite the danger of their situation, despite the uncertainty of her future, Sarah found herself wanting to uncover those layers, to know the man behind the quiet strength. It was a dangerous want, she knew. Her judgment of men had proven fatally flawed once before. Alexander Reed had seemed charming, cultured, kind, right up until the moment he showed his true nature. How could she trust her instincts now, especially in these circumstances where dependence might easily be mistaken for deeper feelings? And yet, watching Noah sleep, his face younger and more vulnerable in repose, Sarah couldn't deny the growing warmth in her chest whenever she looked at him, spoke with him, simply existed in his steady presence. Hours passed as Sarah maintained her vigil, alternating between scanning the valley and checking on Noah. He slept deeply, the exhaustion of the past days catching up with him. She was reluctant to wake him, even as the sun climbed higher in the sky, marking the approach of noon. It was the sound that finally alerted her, a faint but distinct crack of a branch breaking somewhere in the woods below the cabin. Sarah tensed, rifle at ready, eyes straining to see through the trees. Movement, a flash of color among the green and brown of the forest. Then another, riders moving cautiously up the hillside. Sarah counted 3 distinct figures before they disappeared behind a stand of pines. She moved quickly to Noah's side, touching his shoulder gently. "Noah," she whispered, "they're here." He woke instantly, fully alert, despite his abbreviated rest. "How many?" "3, at least. Coming up from the valley." Noah was on his feet in an instant, checking his revolver, moving to the window for a better view. "I see them. Reed Thornton and one of the men from yesterday. They're still a ways off, but they're on the right trail." Sarah's heart pounded in her throat. What do we do? Noah considered their options, his expression grim. Could try to outrun them, head further into the mountains. But they have fresh horses, and they know we're close now. He shook his head. Better to make a stand here. Cabin's defensible, and we have the high ground. The calm practicality of his assessment steadied Sarah's nerves. This was the soldier speaking, the man who had faced worse odds and survived. "Tell me what to do," she said. Noah gave her a quick, approving glance. "Load both weapons. There's extra ammunition in that box under the cot. I'll see what else we can use to our advantage." They worked quickly, preparing for the confrontation to come. Noah moved furniture to create barricades at the window and door, positioned their weapons for easy access, and filled every available container with water in case the siege lasted longer than expected. "When they get close," he instructed, "stay low, away from the window. Let me do the talking first. Reed doesn't strike me as the type to start shooting right away. He'll want to negotiate, try to convince you to come out." Sarah nodded, her mouth dry with fear. "And if negotiation fails?" Noah's expression hardened. "Then we defend ourselves." He paused, looking at her directly. "I won't let him take you, Sarah. Not if that's not what you want." The use of her first name, rare for Noah, underscored the gravity of his promise. "It's not what I want," she said firmly. "I'd rather die than go back to him." Something flashed in Noah's eyes. Determination, anger, perhaps something more. "It won't come to that," he said. "I promise you." The sound of approaching horses grew louder. Noah took up position by the window, rifle ready, but not yet aimed. Sarah stationed herself by the door, revolver in hand, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure it must be audible. "Sullivan." The voice came from the clearing in front of the cabin. Alexander Reed's voice, cultured and controlled. "I know you're in there, and I know Miss Winters is with you." Noah remained silent, watching through a crack in the shutters. "Come now, Sullivan," Reed continued. "This doesn't have to end badly. Just send Sarah out and we'll be on our way. No harm done." When Noah still didn't respond, Reed's voice took on an edge. "She's not what you think she is, Sullivan. She's disturbed, confused. Took something very valuable from me before she ran. I'm willing to forgive that, take her back to St. Louis, get her the help she needs." Noah glanced at Sarah, raising an eyebrow in silent question. She shook her head vehemently. "No. Miss Winters doesn't want to go with you, Reed," Noah called finally. "Best you accept that and ride away." A pause, then Reed's voice again, harder now. "She's not in her right mind, Sullivan, not capable of making that decision. And you're harboring a thief, perhaps worse. That's a serious offense. No more serious than lying to a sheriff, fabricating charges against an innocent woman," Noah countered. "I'm guessing if we were to check your story in St. Louis, we'd find it full of holes." Another pause, longer this time. Sarah could imagine Alexander's face, the tightening of his jaw that always preceded his anger. When he spoke again, the pretense of civility was gone from his voice. "Listen to me carefully, Sullivan. I am not leaving without Sarah. She belongs to me. She is my fiancée, carrying my child, and I will not allow some backwoods recluse to keep her from me." Sarah gasped the lie, shocking in its audacity. "I'm not pregnant," she whispered to Noah. "He's lying." Noah nodded, his expression thunderous. "That's a new low, Reed, even for you," he called out. "Making up a child to force a woman's compliance." "It's no lie," Reed insisted. "Sarah was with child when she fled. Ask her about the night at the Parker Hotel, Sullivan. Ask her what happened after the charity ball." A cold dread washed over Sarah. The charity ball where Alexander had first shown his true colors, his charm dissolving into cruelty once they were alone. The night he had forced himself on her despite her protests, despite her tears. "He's talking about the night he forced me," she whispered, her voice shaking. "But I'm not pregnant. I would know." Noah's face hardened into something dangerous, something she had not seen before. "You've said enough, Reed," he called, his voice cold as winter. "Miss Winters is staying here under my protection. I suggest you leave while you still can." "Your protection?" Reed's laugh was ugly. "What can you offer her?" "Sullivan, a life of poverty in a one-room cabin. A crippled husband with no future. Sarah is accustomed to better things." Noah didn't rise to the bait, though Sarah saw the slight flinch at Reed's cruel words. Last warning, Reed. Ride away now. A long silence followed, broken only by the soft whicker of horses and the whisper of wind through the pines. Then the sound of a rifle being cocked. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Sullivan," Reed called, his voice cold.
"Sarah belongs to me, and I intend to reclaim what's mine." The first shot came as a surprise, not from Reed,
But from one of his companions. It splintered the wood beside the window, sending fragments flying. Noah ducked instinctively, then raised his rifle and returned fire. The peaceful mountain morning erupted into chaos. Shots rang out from both sides, the acrid smell of gunpowder filling the cabin. Sarah crouched behind her barricade, revolver ready, though she had no clear shot from her position. "They're trying to flank us," Noah said, his voice tense as he reloaded. "One of them is moving around to the back." Sarah's grip tightened on her revolver. "What do we do? I'll hold them off from the front. You watch the back door." Noah's eyes met hers, fierce with determination. "Remember what I said, don't hesitate." Sarah nodded, moving to a position where she could see the cabin's rear entrance. Her hands were steady, despite her fear, the weight of the revolver reassuring in her grip. The gunfire continued, sporadic but intense. Through the din, Sarah could hear Alexander shouting orders to his men, his voice tight with frustration. Noah returned fire, strategically conserving ammunition, each shot deliberate and precise. A shadow moved past the small rear window, someone creeping along the cabin wall. Sarah raised her revolver, heart pounding. The back door handle turned slowly, then the door began to open. Sarah fired without hesitation, the shot deafening in the confined space. A cry of pain, and the door slammed shut again. "Got him!" she called to Noah, her voice steadier than she expected. Noah nodded approval, not taking his eyes from his own position. "Good. That'll make them think twice about coming in that way." The firefight settled into a tense stalemate. Reed and his men were pinned down behind rocks and trees at the edge of the clearing, unable to approach the cabin without exposing themselves to Noah's accurate fire. Inside, Noah and Sarah maintained their defensive positions, aware that their ammunition was limited. "They'll wait for nightfall," Noah said during a lull in the shooting. "Try to rush us in the dark." "How much ammunition do we have left?" Sarah asked. "Enough for now, but not for a prolonged siege." Noah's expression was grim but determined. "We need to find a way out of here, or a way to turn the tables." Sarah thought frantically, considering and discarding possibilities. What about the horses? If we could create a distraction, maybe we could make a run for it. Noah shook his head. "Too risky in daylight. They'd pick us off before we got 100 yards. He paused, thinking. "But there might be another way. There's an old mine shaft about half a mile east of here. Goes deep into the mountain, has a second exit that comes out near the creek. If we could reach it, could we reach it without being seen? Maybe. There's a gully that runs behind the cabin, provides some cover. It's steep, difficult going, but it might work." Sarah nodded, determination replacing fear. "Then that's what we'll do. When, next time they try something, creates enough of a distraction, we'll slip out the back, make for the gully." Noah's eyes held hers. "Stay close to me, do exactly as I say. It's going to be dangerous." "I understand." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I trust you, Noah." Something flickered in his eyes at her words, surprise, gratitude, perhaps something deeper. But before he could respond, a shout came from outside. "Sullivan, this is your last chance. Send Sarah out now, or we're coming in to get her." Noah moved back to the window. "Not happening, Reed. You want her, you'll have to come through me." "Have it your way," Reed called back. "But remember, whatever happens next is on your head." A moment of silence, then a new sound, the whoosh of flame followed by the thud of something hitting the cabin roof. Sarah looked up in horror to see smoke beginning to seep through the ceiling. "Fire arrows," Noah said grimly. "They're trying to burn us out." More thuds, as more flaming projectiles hit the cabin. The dry timber of the roof, baked by the summer sun, caught quickly. Smoke began to fill the small space, making it hard to breathe, harder to see. "Now," Noah said, grabbing his rifle and what ammunition he could carry. "Out the back, while they're focused on the fire." Sarah snatched up her bag and followed Noah to the rear door. He opened it cautiously, checking for ambush, then motioned her through. They slipped out into the open air, staying low, using the smoke for cover. The gully Noah had mentioned was visible just beyond a stand of pines, a steep, rocky depression that cut through the hillside. They made for it at a crouching run, expecting a shout or a shot to signal their discovery at any moment. None came. They reached the gully and half slid, half climbed down its steep side rocks and loose soil, giving way beneath their feet. At the bottom, they paused, catching their breath, looking back at the cabin, now fully engulfed in flames. "They'll realize soon enough that we're gone," Noah said, wiping sweat and soot from his face. "We need to move fast." The gully provided good cover, its high sides hiding them from view as they made their way eastward. The going was difficult, loose rocks, fallen branches, patches of thorny undergrowth that tore at their clothes and skin. Sarah stumbled more than once, but Noah was always there to steady her, his hand strong and sure at her elbow. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than half an hour, they reached a section of the hillside where the gully widened, the walls falling away to reveal a small clearing. And there, half hidden by brush and fallen logs, was the entrance to the mine shaft, a dark opening in the rocky hillside shored up with weathered timbers. "Stay close," Noah warned as they approached. "Footings treacherous inside, and there might be wildlife." Sarah nodded, following him into the darkness. The temperature dropped immediately, the air cool and damp with a metallic tang. Noah produced a small tin lantern from his pack and lit it, the feeble flame revealing a narrow tunnel extending deep into the mountain. "Watch your head," he cautioned, leading the way. "Ceiling gets low in places." They moved carefully through the mine shaft, the lantern casting grotesque shadows on the rough walls. In places, the tunnel narrowed so much they had to turn sideways to pass. In others, it widened into small chambers where equipment and tools still lay scattered abandoned when the mine played out. "How did you know about this place?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed in the enclosed space. "Explored it with Thomas when we first settled here," Noah replied. "He had ideas about reopening it, thought there might still be silver to be found. But it wasn't practical, too remote, too much work for too little return. And the second exit, natural chimney about halfway through, opens out near the creek at the base of the hill." Noah paused, holding the lantern higher. "Should be just ahead." Sure enough, the tunnel soon opened into a larger chamber, where a shaft of daylight streamed down from an opening in the ceiling perhaps 15 feet above. A crude ladder of rope and wood rungs hung from the opening, swaying slightly in the draft. "You first," Noah said, holding the lantern up to illuminate the ladder. "I'll be right behind you." Sarah eyed the ladder dubiously, testing its strength with a careful tug. It held, though it creaked ominously. "Will it hold both of us?" "One at a time," Noah said. "You go up, then I'll follow." Sarah hesitated suddenly, reluctant to leave Noah even briefly. "Be careful," she said, meeting his eyes in the lantern light. "Always am," he replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Sarah began to climb the ladder, swaying with her weight. The rungs were rough under her hands, some rotted with age and damp. She moved carefully, testing each one before trusting it with her full weight. Halfway up, She heard it, the distant shout of voices echoing through the mine shaft. Reed and his men had found the entrance. "Hurry!" Noah called from below, his voice urgent but controlled. "Don't look back. Just climb." Sarah increased her pace, ignoring the protest of her muscles, the sting of splinters in her palms. The opening above grew larger, the light brighter. With a final effort, she pulled herself through, emerging into a small clearing beside a rushing creek. She turned immediately, looking back down the shaft, waiting for Noah to appear. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one, an eternity of worry. What was happening below? Had Reed caught up to them? Was Noah fighting, perhaps dying while she waited in safety? Just as she was about to climb back down, a hand appeared at the edge of the opening, then another, and finally Noah hauled himself up and out, breathing hard. "Noah!" Sarah moved to help him, relief washing over her. "What happened?" "Collapsed part of the tunnel behind me," he said, getting to his feet. "Won't stop them for long, but it'll slow them down." He looked around, orienting himself. "Creek flows east away from my cabin. If we follow it, it'll take us to the valley, then to the main road." "And then?" Sarah asked, the question that had been hovering at the edges of her mind, finally spoken aloud. Noah met her gaze, his expression serious. "Then we find somewhere safe, somewhere Reed can't find you." He paused, then added, "Somewhere you can start fresh if that's what you want." The implication was clear. He was offering her freedom, not just from Reed, but from any obligation to him as well. It was a generous offer, one that spoke to Noah's character. But as Sarah looked at him, at this man who had risked everything for her, she realized that freedom was no longer what she wanted most. What she wanted was standing right in front of her, solid and steadfast, waiting for her decision. Before she could find the words to express this realization, the sound of voices echoed up from the shaft, closer, now urgent with pursuit. "We need to move," Noah said, taking her hand. "Ready?" Sarah nodded, tightening her grip on his hand. "Ready." Together, they turned and ran along the creek bank, leaving the mine shaft behind each step, taking them further from danger and closer, though neither yet realized it, to home. They followed the creek for miles, its winding course taking them through deep forests and small meadows bright with autumn wildflowers. The sun was low in the western sky by the time they reached the valley floor, casting long shadows across the landscape. Noah set a grueling pace, driven by the knowledge that Reed and his men were not far behind. Sarah kept up without complaint, though her feet ached in her worn boots and her skirts, heavy with creek water from several crossings, dragged at her legs. "Need to rest?" Noah asked, noticing her fatigue. Sarah shook her head, determined. "I can keep going." Noah studied her for a moment, then nodded approval. "There's a place not far ahead, old trapper's cabin. Might be able to spend the night there, get some rest, before pushing on to Red Bluff tomorrow." The prospect of shelter of rest was tempting, but Sarah frowned at the mention of Red Bluff. "Is it wise to go back there? Won't that be the first place Reed looks?" "Exactly why he might not expect it," Noah said. "Besides, Eleanor Holbrook strikes me as a woman with resources we could use right now." Sarah couldn't argue with that assessment. Mrs. Holbrook had already proven herself an ally, and her boarding house might offer a temporary sanctuary while they determined their next move. The trapper's cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a lean-to, 3 walls, and a slanted roof open at one end. But it was shelter of a sort and hidden in a grove of aspens whose leaves shimmered gold in the evening light. "Not much," Noah said, echoing his words from the hunting cabin that now lay in ashes. "But it'll do for one night." Sarah sank gratefully onto a fallen log, her legs trembling with exhaustion. Noah immediately set about making the space more habitable. gathering dry grass for bedding, collecting firewood, checking the area for signs of recent habitation or danger. "No fire tonight," he said as he returned from his reconnaissance. "Too risky. Reed and his men are still out there, and a fire would be like sending up a signal flare." Sarah nodded, wrapping her shawl more tightly around her shoulders against the growing chill. Noah noticed the gesture and frowned. "You're cold," he said, shrugging out of his coat. "Here." "No, I can't take your coat," Sarah protested. "You'll freeze." "I'm used to the cold," Noah insisted, draping the coat around her shoulders. "Wyoming winters make this feel like a summer evening." The coat was warm from his body, smelling of pine and wood smoke, and something indefinably Noah. Sarah pulled it closer, grateful not just for the warmth, but for the care behind the gesture. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the coat, for everything." Noah looked away, uncomfortable as always with gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Sarah said with certainty. "Not anyone." They settled in for the night, sharing the meager provisions Noah had managed to grab before they fled the hunting cabin: jerky, a few biscuits, water from the creek. It wasn't much, but hunger made it taste like a feast. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped, further stars appearing one by one in the clear mountain sky. Sarah shivered, despite Noah's coat, her damp skirts drawing heat from her body. "You should try to sleep," Noah said, noticing her discomfort. "I'll keep watch." Sarah shook her head. "You need rest too, and I'm too cold to sleep anyway." Noah considered this, then moved to sit beside her on the log. "Body heat," he said matter-of-factly, "most effective way to stay warm in the wild." The suggestion, practical though it was, brought a flush to Sarah's cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. But she didn't object, as Noah settled beside her, his solid warmth against her side, immediately making a difference. They sat in silence for a time, watching the stars emerge, listening to the night sounds of the forest, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the soft sigh of wind through the aspens. "Do you think they're still following us?" Sarah asked eventually. Noah was quiet for a moment, considering. "Reed doesn't strike me as a man who gives up easily, but even he has to rest sometime." He shifted slightly, his arm brushing hers. "We've covered a lot of ground today, changed direction several times. With luck, they're still searching in the wrong area. And if they're not, if they find us, then we face them." Noah's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "Together. Together." The word hung in the night air, full of meaning beyond its simple syllables. Together implied a partnership, a shared future, a commitment beyond the immediate crisis. "Noah," Sarah began, then hesitated, unsure how to express the tangle of emotions in her chest. He turned to look at her, his face half-shadowed in the starlight. "When this is over, if we make it through this, what happens then?" Noah was silent for a long moment, his gaze steady on her face. "That depends on you," he said finally. "On what you want." "What if I don't know what I want?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I'm afraid to want anything after everything that's happened?" Noah's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers warm against her cold ones. "Then you take the time to figure it out. No rush, no pressure." He paused, then added, "And maybe while you're figuring it out, you stay somewhere safe. Somewhere you can heal. With you." The question slipped out before she could stop it, vulnerable and hopeful. In the dim starlight, Sarah saw something soften in Noah's expression, a gentleness that made her heart ache. "If that's what you want," he said quietly, "my cabin's not much, but it's yours for as long as you need it." It was a generous offer, A kind one, exactly what she would expect from this honorable man. But Sarah found herself wanting more than generosity, more than kindness. She wanted. Before she could complete the thought, Noah stiffened his hand, tightening on hers. "Listen," he whispered. Sarah held her breath, straining to hear what had alerted him. At first she heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of the night. Then, faint but distinct, the whinny of a horse, somewhere in the darkness. "They've found us," Noah said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to move. Now." They gathered their few possessions quickly, moving with the quiet efficiency of those accustomed to danger. Noah led the way, guiding Sarah through the darkness with a sure hand away from the lean-to and deeper into the aspen grove. The trees provided good cover, their tall trunks ghostly in the starlight, their leaves rustling softly overhead. Noah moved confidently, seeming to know exactly where he was going, despite the darkness. "Creek's just ahead," he whispered. "We'll cross it, follow the other bank downstream. Water will hide our scent, make it harder to track us." Sarah nodded, though she doubted he could see the gesture in the darkness. She followed close behind him, one hand on his back, to maintain contact, trusting him completely to lead them to safety. They reached the creek, its waters black and silver in the starlight. Noah helped Sarah across the water, cold around their ankles. On the far bank, they paused, listening. The forest was silent now, too silent the normal night sounds hushed, as if the creatures that made them sensed danger. "This way," Noah said, turning downstream. "Stay in the water, as much as possible." They waded along the creek, the cold water numbing Sarah's feet, the uneven creek bed making each step a challenge. But fear drove her forward, the knowledge that Alexander Reed was somewhere behind them, hunting them through the darkness. After what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, Noah signaled a halt. They had reached a place where the creek widened, forming a small pool before continuing its journey. The banks were steeper here, lined with boulders and fallen logs. "We'll rest here for a bit," Noah said, helping Sarah up onto the bank. "Catch our breath, then push on to Red Bluff." "How far are we from town?" Sarah asked, sinking gratefully onto a boulder, her feet throbbing with cold and fatigue. "Maybe 5 miles. We can make it by dawn if we keep moving." Noah settled beside her, his posture alert, despite his obvious exhaustion. "Reed and his men will have to stop soon, rest their horses. That gives us an advantage." Sarah nodded, too tired to speak. The events of the day. The firefight, the escape through the mine, the long trek through the wilderness had drained her completely. Even fear couldn't keep exhaustion at bay any longer. Seeing her fatigue, Noah reached out his hand, gentle on her shoulder. "Just a short rest," he promised. "Then we'll go on." Sarah leaned into his touch, grateful for the comfort it offered. "I don't know if I can make it 5 more miles," she admitted. "You can," Noah said with quiet confidence. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah Winters." There it was again, that use of her first name, rare for Noah, always significant. Sarah looked up at him, his face shadowed but familiar now, dear in ways she hadn't expected when they first met. "Noah," she began, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. He waited, patient as always, his hand still on her shoulder, warm and steady. She tried again, but was interrupted by a sound that froze the blood in her veins, the unmistakable click of a rifle being cocked somewhere in the darkness behind them. "How touching!" Alexander Reed's voice came from the shadows, cold with triumph. The schoolteacher and the soldier sharing a tender moment. Noah was on his feet, instantly positioning himself between Sarah and the voice, his hand going to the revolver at his side. "Don't," Reed warned, stepping into view at the edge of the clearing. "Unless you want the lady to watch you die." He wasn't alone. Thornton emerged from the shadows on the other side of the clearing, rifle aimed at Noah's chest. The third man, whom Sarah had wounded at the hunting cabin, limped into view, his face twisted with pain and hatred. They were trapped, caught between armed men and the creek at their backs. Noah's hand remained on his revolver, but he didn't draw, recognizing the futility of resistance in this moment. "What do you want, Reed?" he asked, his voice steady, despite the danger. Reed laughed, a sound without humor. "I think that's obvious, Sullivan. I want what's mine." His gaze shifted to Sarah, cold and possessive. "Come here, Sarah. It's time to go home." Sarah stood, her legs shaking but her spine straight. "I am not yours, Alexander. I never was." Reed's expression hardened. "Don't be foolish, Sarah. You're coming back to St. Louis with me one way or another. The only question is whether Sullivan here lives or dies in the process." It was the threat to Noah that broke something in Sarah. A dam of fear and compliance built over years of being told her worth was determined by others. In its place surged a river of rage, of determination, of a strength she hadn't known she possessed. "No," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Alexander. Not now, not ever." Reed's face twisted with anger. "You don't have a choice," he snarled, raising his rifle. "Sullivan, step aside. My quarrel isn't with you unless you make it so." Noah didn't move, his body a shield between Sarah and danger. The lady said, "No, Reed. I suggest you listen." For a moment, the tableau held Reed and his men, with weapons raised, Noah standing firm, Sarah behind him, but not cowering, her hand finding his in the darkness, a silent affirmation of their unity. Then, breaking the deadly stillness, came a new sound, the crack of a rifle from the trees behind Reed, followed by a shout. "Drop your weapons! All of you!" Reed whirled, startled, his rifle wavering. From the shadows emerged a familiar figure. Sheriff Daniels, his own rifle aimed steadily at Reed's chest. And behind him, emerging from the trees like avenging spirits, were Mrs. Holbrook and the blacksmith, Hanson, both armed and grim-faced. "What is the meaning of this?" Reed demanded, his composure cracking. "Sheriff, I told you, this woman is my fiancée. She's not well." "Save it, Reed," Sheriff Daniels cut him off. "I've heard enough lies from you to last a lifetime." He gestured with his rifle. "Now drop your weapons, all of you, before I lose my patience." Reed hesitated, calculation clear in his eyes as he assessed the new odds. Then slowly he lowered his rifle. Thornton and the wounded man followed suit. "Wise decision," Sheriff Daniels said, moving forward to collect the weapons. "Franklin Thornton, I expected better from you. Aiding and abetting in attempted kidnapping, arson, assault, with deadly weapons. That's a long list of charges." Thornton's face was ashen. "Daniels, be reasonable. Reed assured me this was a simple matter of retrieving his disturbed fiancée." "Like I said, save it." The sheriff turned to Reed. "As for you, Mr. Reed, I received a very interesting telegram this morning from the St. Louis police. Seems they're quite eager to speak with you about some financial irregularities at your bank. Embezzlement, fraud, serious charges." Reed's composed facade crumbled entirely. "That's absurd. I demand to see this telegram." "All in good time," Sheriff Daniels said. "For now, you and your friends are coming back to Red Bluff with me. Hanson, tie their hands." As Hanson moved to secure the prisoners, Mrs. Holbrook hurried to Sarah and Noah, her normally stern face softened with concern. "Are you hurt?" she asked, looking them over for injuries. "We're all right," Noah answered, though his voice was rough with exhaustion. "How did you find us?" Hanson saw Reed and his men heading into the hills yesterday. guessed they were after you." Mrs. Holbrook's sharp eyes missed nothing, including Noah and Sarah's still-linked hands. "We've been tracking them since dawn. Caught up just in time, it seems." "The telegram," Sarah asked. "Is it true about Alexander's crimes, Mrs.?" Holbrook's smile was grim satisfaction. "Oh yes, I told you I had contacts in St. Louis. Turns out Mr. Reed has been stealing from his bank for years. When you discovered it and threatened to expose him, he tried to discredit you, claim you were the thief." She patted Sarah's hand. "But he made a mistake. The bank's ledgers don't lie, and there are other victims who've come forward now that they know they're not alone." Relief washed over Sarah so intense she felt her knees might buckle. It was over. The nightmare that had begun in St. Louis months ago was finally ending. Alexander would face justice for his crimes, and she looked up at Noah, finding him already watching her. His eyes filled with questions he wouldn't ask, emotions he wouldn't name unless she did first. "It's over," she whispered as much to herself as to him. "Yes," he agreed, his hand tightening on hers. "It's over." But as they stood there in the pre-dawn light, exhausted but alive, Sarah knew that something else was just beginning. Dawn broke over Red Bluff, painting the weathered buildings in shades of gold and rose. Sarah stood at the window of her room in the boarding house, watching as the town came to life, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, ranch hands heading to the saloon for breakfast, children racing to the schoolhouse. It had been 3 days since their dramatic rescue in the forest, 3 days since Alexander Reed and his accomplices had been locked in the town jail, awaiting transport to face charges in St. Louis. 3 days of rest, of recovery, of trying to make sense of all that had happened. Sarah's gaze drifted to Noah's cabin on the distant hillside, barely visible as a darker speck against the pines. He had returned there yesterday after ensuring she was safely settled at the boarding house. His cabin had survived Reed's search, though it had been ransacked, personal items strewn about, furniture overturned. Noah had been characteristically stoic about the damage, saying only that it gave him a reason to make some long-overdue improvements. He hadn't asked her to return with him, hadn't pressed for any decision about her future, had simply said, "When you're ready, whatever you decide, I'll be there." The words and the respect for her autonomy behind them had touched Sarah deeply. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, turning from the window. Mrs. Holbrook entered, carrying a tray with tea and toast. She set it on the small table by the window, then straightened, studying Sarah with her sharp eyes. "You're looking better," she observed. "Some color back in your cheeks." Sarah smiled, grateful for the older woman's blunt concern. "I feel better, stronger." "Good." Mrs. Holbrook poured tea into 2 cups, a rare gesture that indicated she intended to stay and talk. "Because I've received another telegram from St. Louis that you should know about." Sarah tensed, her brief moment of peace shattered. "About Alexander." "Indirectly." Mrs. Holbrook handed her a cup of tea. "It seems that when news of Reed's arrest became public, several other victims came forward, women he had courted, swindled, discredited when they threatened to expose him." "How many?" Sarah asked, a strange mix of relief and sadness washing over her. Relief that she hadn't been the only one, that she hadn't been uniquely foolish. Sadness for those other women who had suffered as she had. 5 so far, spanning the past decade. Mrs. Holbrook's expression was grim. Reed was clever. He chose women with few connections, limited resources, those whose word would easily be dismissed against his. You were the first to escape with evidence. "The bank ledger," Sarah murmured. "I didn't even realize its significance when I took it. I just knew it was important to him, something he always kept locked away." And that ledger, combined with testimony from the other victims, ensures Reed will spend many years in prison. Mrs. Holbrook sipped her tea, her gaze thoughtful. Which brings me to my next point. The bank in St. Louis is offering a reward for the return of the ledger, quite a substantial one. Sarah stared at her, shocked. A reward for me. For the recovery of stolen property, yes. Mrs. Holbrook's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Enough to give you options, Sarah. You could return to St. Louis, clear your name, perhaps even re-establish yourself as a teacher. Or you could go elsewhere, start fresh, where no one knows your history. The possibilities unfolded before Sarah like pages in a book. Return to the familiar world of St. Louis, vindicated but forever marked by scandal. Travel to a new city where no one knew her name. Perhaps even stay in Red Bluff, though what role she would play in this small community remained uncertain. And then there was Noah. Noah, with his quiet strength, his gentle hands, his cabin on the hillside that had already begun to feel like home. I need time to think, Sarah said finally, to consider what I truly want. Mrs. Holbrook nodded approval in her eyes. A wise approach. Too often, women make decisions based on necessity rather than desire. She rose, smoothing her skirts. Take all the time you need. Your position here is secure for as long as you wish it. As she moved to the door, Sarah was struck by a sudden curiosity. Mrs. Holbrook, she said, may I ask you something personal? The older woman paused, one eyebrow raised. You may ask. I may choose not to answer. The photographs in the hallway, the man and children. They were your family, weren't they? Something flickered in Mrs. Holbrook's eyes. Pain memory, a shadow of old grief. Yes, she said simply. My husband James and our children Mary and Thomas, lost in a house fire in '68, while I was away visiting my sister. The stark simplicity of the statement conveyed more than pages of description, could have the devastation, the guilt of survival, the empty years that followed. I'm sorry, Sarah said softly. I didn't mean to pry. You're not prying, Mrs. Holbrook replied, her voice gentler than Sarah had ever heard it. It's been 15 years. The pain fades, though it never truly disappears. She paused, then added, I came west afterward, needing to be somewhere they had never been, somewhere I wouldn't see their ghosts on every street corner. And you found Red Bluff. I found purpose, Mrs. Holbrook corrected. This boarding house helping others who needed a fresh start as I did. Her sharp gaze held Sarah's. We're not so different, you and I. Both running from loss, both stronger than we knew. With that, she left, closing the door softly behind her. Sarah remained by the window, the tea cooling in her cup, Mrs. Holbrook's words echoing in her mind. Both stronger than we knew. It was true, Sarah realized. She had survived loss, betrayal, flight, fear, and emerged not broken, but tempered like steel forged in fire. The Sarah Winters who had fled St. Louis in terror would never have stood up to Alexander Reed in that forest clearing, would never have found the courage to say no in the face of his threats. That courage had come from somewhere from the wilderness that had both challenged and sheltered her, from Mrs. Holbrook's brisk support, from Noah's unwavering belief in her strength and her right to choose her own path. Noah. Her thoughts circled back to him as they increasingly did these days. What did she feel for this quiet, complex man? Gratitude, certainly for his protection and kindness. Respect for his integrity, his decency in a world that often rewarded neither. But there was something more, something deeper that had taken root during those days in his cabin during their flight through the wilderness during those moments when danger stripped away pretense and revealed the essence of who they both were. Was it love? Sarah wasn't sure she trusted herself to know. Alexander Reed had claimed to love her once, and she had believed him, mistaking charm for character, possession for passion. How could she be certain this feeling for Noah was true, was real, was lasting? And yet, Noah was nothing like Alexander. Where Reed had been all surface charm concealing emptiness, Noah's rough exterior hid depths of feeling, of thought, of quiet nobility. Where Reed had sought to control her, Noah had consistently respected her choices even when they might cost him what he wanted. And what did Noah want? He had never said not directly, but she had seen it in his eyes, felt it in the gentle pressure of his hand on hers, heard it in the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. Sarah turned from the window, decision crystallizing within her. Before she could determine her future, she needed to understand her past, to face it fully without fear or shame. And there was one person in Red Bluff who might help her do that. Sheriff Daniels was at his desk when Sarah entered the jailhouse, writing in a logbook, with the careful concentration of a man more comfortable with actions than words. He looked up at her entrance, surprise crossing his weathered face. "Miss Winters?" he said, rising. "Didn't expect to see you here." Sarah steeled herself, hands clasped tightly before her. "I need to speak with Mr. Reed." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Are you sure that's wise? After everything he's done?" "I'm sure it's necessary," Sarah replied. "There are things I need to say to him, questions only he can answer." Sheriff Daniels studied her for a long moment, assessing her resolve. "All right," he said finally. "But I'll be right outside the cell, and at the first sign of trouble, I'm pulling you out of there." Sarah nodded her agreement, following him through a door into the cell block. A small room with 3 cells, only one of which was occupied. Alexander Reed sat on a narrow cot. His once immaculate clothing rumpled his beard, showing several days' growth. He looked up as they approached, his expression shifting from boredom to sharp interest. "Sarah," he said, rising, "I knew you'd come eventually." His voice, that smooth, cultured voice that had once charmed her, now sent a chill down her spine. But Sarah stood her ground, meeting his gaze steadily. "10 minutes," Sheriff Daniels said, unlocking the cell door. "That's all." He allowed Sarah to enter, then locked the door behind her, a precaution that simultaneously protected her from Reed and Reed from her, she realized with grim amusement. Alexander watched her with the calculating gaze she had once mistaken for admiration. "Come to gloat, Sarah. It doesn't suit you." "I haven't come to gloat," she said, her voice calmer than she felt. "I've come for answers." "Ah, answers." He sat back down on the cot, gesturing for her to take the room's only chair. "What could I possibly tell you that you don't already know? That I'm a thief, a liar, a man who uses women for his own ends." His smile was cold. "You've clearly figured that out for yourself." Sarah remained standing, unwilling to accept even this small gesture from him. "I want to know why. Why me, Alexander? There must have been easier targets, women with more money, fewer questions." Reed studied her head, tilted slightly, as if seeing her for the first time. "You really don't know, do you, how exceptional you are?" He laughed softly. "That's why, Sarah, you were a challenge, intelligent, independent, not easily impressed. Breaking someone like you, making you love me despite your better judgment, there's a particular satisfaction in that." The casual cruelty of his words should have hurt, but instead Sarah felt only a profound pity. "You never loved me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Love is a convenient fiction," Reed replied with a shrug. A story we tell to get what we want. No, Sarah said firmly. Love is real. I've seen it in Mrs. Holbrook's eyes when she speaks of her lost family in Noah Sullivan's every action, in the way this town came together to protect one of their own. She stepped closer to the bars, her voice gaining strength. I pity you, Alexander. You'll never know what it means to truly care for someone beyond yourself. Anger flashed in Reed's eyes, the mask of civility slipping. Spare me your backwoods philosophy, Sarah, and your pity. I don't need either. His smile turned ugly. Tell me, has Sullivan taken you to his bed yet, or is he too noble, too respectful of your delicate sensibilities? Sarah refused to rise to the bait to show how his words affected her. You have no power over me anymore, Alexander. Not over my feelings, not over my future, not over any part of me. Don't I? Reed leaned forward, his voice dropping to a silky whisper.
Every time you flinch at a man's touch, every time you question your own judgment, every time you wake in the night remembering
That's my power, Sarah, and it will never entirely fade. For a moment, Sarah felt the old fear rising, the doubt, the shame. Then, like a shaft of sunlight breaking through clouds, came the realization that Reed was wrong. His actions had wounded her, yes, but wounds heal, leaving scars that tell stories of survival, not defeat. You're wrong, she said simply. What you did to me is part of my story, but it isn't the whole story, and it certainly isn't the end. She stepped back from the bars feeling lighter somehow, as if a burden she hadn't known she was carrying had been lifted. Goodbye, Alexander. I won't be back. Reed's face contorted with rage, the charming mask gone completely now. You think you've won. You think your precious Sullivan wants you damaged goods. A woman with a reputation in tatters. You're a fool, Sarah Winters. You always were. Sarah turned away, signaling to Sheriff Daniels that she was finished. As he unlocked the cell door, she looked back at Reed one last time. Better a fool who believes in love than a clever man who believes in nothing, she said. And then she was walking away, Reed's angry shouts following her, but unable to touch her, unable to pull her back into the shadow of fear she had lived in for so long. Outside the jailhouse, Sarah paused, drawing deep breaths of the clean mountain air. The encounter had been difficult, painful in some ways, but necessary. In facing Reed and speaking her truth to him, she had reclaimed something vital. Her sense of self, her belief in her own strength, her right to a future untainted by his influence. And now, with that future opening before her, there was one more conversation she needed to have. One more truth to be spoken. One more choice to be made. Noah Sullivan was splitting wood when Sarah arrived at his cabin, the steady rhythm of axe on timber echoing through the clearing. He didn't immediately notice her approach, focused as he was on his task, and Sarah took a moment to simply watch him. He moved with the fluid economy of someone completely at ease in his body, in his surroundings. Each swing of the axe was precise, powerful, without being showy, effective with minimal effort. It was, Sarah realized, characteristic of everything Noah did. No wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish, just quiet competence and a kind of grace that had nothing to do with social refinement and everything to do with honest work. When he finally looked up and saw her, the axe paused mid-swing, surprise, and something warmer flickering across his face. He set the tool aside, wiping his hands on his trousers, in a gesture that struck Sarah as endearingly self-conscious. "Sarah!" He said her name in his mouth, still a rare enough occurrence to make her heart quicken. Didn't expect to see you today. I hope I'm not intruding, she said, suddenly uncertain of her welcome, despite the evident pleasure in his eyes. Not at all. Noah gestured toward the cabin. Was just about to take a break. Would you like some coffee? Sarah nodded, following him into the cabin. It looked different than when she had left it. The furniture rearranged, the floor swept clean, the windows open to the mountain air. Noah had been busy in the days since their return, restoring order to the home Reed and his men had violated. As Noah prepared coffee on the stove, Sarah wandered the small space, reacquainting herself with its simple comforts. Her gaze fell on the mantel where Noah had placed the carved wooden box she remembered from her first stay. Beside it now stood something new. A small rough figure whittled from pine, a woman with her face turned toward an unseen horizon. "Did you make this?" she asked, touching the figure gently. Noah glanced over, a flush rising on his weathered cheeks. "Just something to pass the time in the evenings," he said. "Not very good, I'm afraid." But it was good, simple but expressive, capturing a sense of yearning, of searching, of hope. "It's beautiful," Sarah said softly. Noah didn't respond, busy with the coffee, but she saw his shoulders relax slightly at her praise. He brought 2 cups to the table, gesturing for her to sit. They sat across from each other, steam rising between them, the moment stretching with unspoken words. Sarah curled her fingers around the warm cup, gathering her courage. "I spoke with Alexander today," she said finally. Noah's head jerked up, surprise and concern in his eyes. "At the jail? Why?" "I needed to face him one last time. To understand, if I could, why he did what he did." Sarah took a sip of her coffee, the familiar bitter taste grounding her. "And to prove to myself that I'm not afraid of him anymore." Noah studied her, his gaze searching, but not judging. "And did you understand?" "Not entirely. I'm not sure anyone could truly understand a mind like his." Sarah set her cup down, meeting Noah's eyes directly. "But I did learn something important about myself, about what I want for my future." Noah went very still, his cup halfway to his lips. "And what is that?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that once spoken, these words could never be taken back. "I want to stay in Red Bluff," she said. "I want to build a life here, with you if you'll have me." The cup in Noah's hand trembled slightly, the only outward sign of his reaction. He set it down carefully, his eyes never leaving her face. "Sarah!" he began, then stopped, as if the words he needed weren't readily available to him. "Are you sure you could go anywhere now? Do anything? The reward money gives me the freedom to choose," she finished for him. "And I'm choosing this. Choosing you." She reached across the table, her hand covering his. "Unless I've misread everything, unless what I feel is one-sided—" "No," Noah said quickly, turning his hand to clasp hers. "No, it's not one-sided, not at all." His voice was rough with emotion, his eyes bright with feelings he'd kept carefully banked until now. I want you to be sure. I'm not a wealthy man, not educated like you. This cabin, this land, it's all I have to offer." "It's more than enough," Sarah said, her voice steady with conviction. "More than I ever thought I'd find when I fled St. Louis." She squeezed his hand gently. "Besides, I've seen your books, your drawings. You're an educated man, Noah Sullivan, whether you have formal schooling or not." A smile touched his lips, transforming his face in a way that made Sarah's heart skip. "Been meaning to ask you about that," he said. "You mentioned once that you were a teacher. What did you teach?" "Literature primarily. Some history." Sarah tilted her head, curious about the direction of his question. "Why?" Noah hesitated, a vulnerability in his expression that she had rarely seen. "I've been thinking. he said slowly. Red Bluff needs a proper school. Town's growing, more families settling in the valley. Right now the children are taught in the back room of the church when the traveling preacher remembers to come through. Sarah felt a thrill of understanding. You want to build a school? Noah nodded the idea clearly, one he had considered carefully. Have the land for it, that clearing on the east side of my property near the road. Been drawing up plans for a while now. He paused, watching her reaction. The town could use a real teacher, someone who knows how to reach children, how to open their minds to possibilities. The vision unfolded before Sarah, a small schoolhouse, filled with the children of ranchers and shopkeepers, a place of learning and growth in this rugged, beautiful country. And herself at the heart of it, doing work that mattered, work she loved. It would be wonderful, she said, her voice soft with emotion, a gift to this community. To us as well, Noah said, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. If we're to have a future together, Sarah, I want it to be one where both of us can use our gifts, follow our passions. His eyes held hers, steady and certain. I don't want you to ever look back and regret choosing this life, choosing me. The care behind his words, the respect for her as a whole person with dreams and abilities of her own, confirmed everything Sarah had come to believe about this man. Alexander Reed had seen her as a possession to be acquired, a challenge to be conquered. Noah Sullivan saw her as a partner, a companion, an equal. I won't regret it, she promised. Not ever. Something shifted in Noah's expression, then a decision made. He rose, still holding her hand, and moved around the table to kneel before her chair. The gesture was so unexpected, so uncharacteristic of his usual reserve, that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Sarah Winters, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his face. I'm not good with fancy words, never have been, but I know what I feel, and I know what I want. He took both her hands in his touch gentle but sure. I want to build a life with you here in this place that's become home to both of us. I want to wake each morning with you beside me, work alongside you, grow old, watching the seasons change over these mountains. He paused, drawing a deep breath. Will you marry me? The simplicity of the proposal, the honest emotion behind it, touched Sarah more deeply than any elaborate declaration could have. Yes, she said, her voice clear despite the tears on her cheeks. Yes, Noah Sullivan, I will marry you. He rose then, drawing her to her feet, into his arms. Their first kiss was tentative, gentle, a question asked and answered, a promise made. The second was deeper, more certain, a seal on the future they had chosen together. When they finally parted, Noah rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her face. Never thought I'd find this again, he murmured. After Thomas died, after everything, I thought that part of my life was over. I know, Sarah said, understanding completely. I felt the same way, that I was too damaged, too wary to ever trust again. She touched his face, the stubble rough under her fingers. But then you found me in the storm. You found me too, Noah said. In my own kind of storm. They stood together in the quiet cabin, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, painting them in gold. Outside, the Wyoming wilderness stretched to the horizon, wild and beautiful and full of possibility. Inside, two people who had thought themselves alone in the world discovered that second chances were possible, that wounds could heal, that love could grow in the most unexpected places. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church at the center of Red Bluff. Mrs. Holbrook stood as witness for Sarah, while Hanson the blacksmith stood for Noah. The ceremony was simple. The words, ancient and powerful, binding two lives that had seemed destined for solitude into a shared future. Sarah wore a dress of deep blue ordered from Cheyenne with part of her reward money. Noah wore the only suit he owned, somewhat outdated, but meticulously brushed and pressed for the occasion. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, their hands linked before the altar, their faces alight with quiet joy. Afterward, the entire town gathered for a celebration at the boarding house. The long tables in the dining room laden with food, contributed by every household. There was music, Hanson proving surprisingly skilled with a fiddle, and dancing and toasts to the happiness of the new couple. Through it all, Noah stayed close to Sarah's side, his hand often finding hers, his eyes returning to her face, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. And Sarah watching him move among the townspeople who had become her neighbors. Her community felt a contentment she had never thought to experience again. As the evening deepened, Mrs. Holbrook found Sarah near the punch bowl observing the dancing with a smile. "Happy?" the older woman asked, her usual briskness softened for the occasion. "Very," Sarah replied, her gaze finding Noah across the room deep in conversation with Sheriff Daniels. "More than I thought possible." Mrs. Holbrook nodded satisfaction in her sharp eyes. "You've both earned it after everything." She paused, then added, "I received another telegram from St. Louis yesterday. Reed's trial has been set for next month. Given the evidence against him, he's looking at 20 years at least." Sarah absorbed this news with a calmness that surprised her. Alexander Reed seemed distant now, a shadow from another life unable to touch the brightness of her present. "Good," she said simply. "Justice will be served." "Indeed it will." Mrs. Holbrook studied her for a moment longer, then said, "I have something for you. A wedding gift." She reached into her pocket and produced a small key on a ribbon. "This was my daughter Mary's. She would have been about your age now had she lived." Sarah accepted the key with reverence, understanding the significance of such a personal gift from the usually reserved woman. "Thank you," she said softly. "What does it open?" "A cedar chest in the attic of the boarding house. It contains some things that might be useful to a young couple starting out, linens, quilts, some simple treasures I've kept all these years." Mrs. Holbrook's voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes held warmth. No sense letting them gather dust when they could be put to good use. Impulsively, Sarah embraced the older woman, feeling her stiffen in surprise before relaxing slightly into the hug. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, "for everything." Mrs. Holbrook patted her back awkwardly, unused to such displays of affection. "Yes, well," she said, stepping back, "just be happy, my dear. That's thanks enough." As Mrs. Holbrook moved away to oversee the refreshments, Noah appeared at Sarah's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting the sheen of tears in her eyes. Sarah showed him the key, explaining Mrs. Holbrook's gift. "She's given us more than things," she said. "She's given us her blessing, her acceptance into her family in a way." Noah nodded, understanding the significance. "She's a remarkable woman," he said. "Stronger than most men I've known, despite everything she's lost." "She said something to me once," Sarah recalled. "We're not so different, you and I. Both running from loss, both stronger than we knew." She looked up at Noah, her heart full. "I think that's true of all of us in different ways. You, me, Mrs. Holbrook, we've all lost, all suffered. But we've found each other, found ways to build something new from the ashes of what was lost." Noah's arm tightened around her waist, drawing her closer. "You make me want to be worthy of that strength," he said, his voice low with emotion. "To be the man you deserve." "You already are," Sarah assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. You always have been. The celebration continued around them, the small community of Red Bluff, marking the union of two people who had come to them as strangers and become part of the fabric of the town. As the evening wore on, Sarah and Noah slipped away, ready to begin their life together in the cabin that would now be truly home to both of them. The seasons turned as they always do in Wyoming, summer fading to autumn, yielding to the crystal clarity of winter. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the land in white silence, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. Sarah stood at the window of the cabin, watching as the flakes drifted down from a pearl-gray sky. Behind her, Noah was building up the fire, the crackle and pop of burning pine, creating a cozy counterpoint to the silence outside. It's beautiful, she said, her breath fogging the glass, like the whole world has been made clean. Noah joined her at the window, his arm slipping around her waist, in what had become a familiar, cherished gesture. First snow's always special, he agreed. Everything looks different, even things you see every day. Sarah leaned into him, grateful for his solid warmth in the face of winter's chill. They had been married for 3 months now, settling into a rhythm of shared life that felt at once novel and as natural as breathing. Each day brought new discoveries. Noah's unexpected talent for storytelling, Sarah's gift for coaxing reluctant plants to grow the way they fit together in the narrow bed, as if designed for each other. There had been challenges too, of course. Learning to accommodate another person's habits and preferences after years of solitude wasn't always easy. Noah sometimes retreated into silence when troubled, a habit Sarah was learning to respect rather than take personally. Sarah occasionally woke from nightmares, remnants of old fears that Noah soothed with quiet words and gentle hands. But the joys far outweighed the difficulties. The school was progressing rapidly, the framework already in place, the roof to be added when spring came. The town had embraced the project enthusiastically, contributing labor materials and ideas.
Sarah had begun gathering books, planning lessons, preparing to welcome the children of Red Bluff to a proper education. Their own future had expanded in unexpected ways as well. Just last week, Sarah had shared with Noah the news she had been certain of for some time come summer. Their family would grow by one. Noah's reaction had been everything she could have hoped for: joy mixed with awe, pride with tenderness, and underneath it all a fierce determination to protect and cherish both her and the child they had created. Now, as they stood together watching the first snow of winter transform their world, Sarah felt a contentment so profound it bordered on disbelief. How had she come so far from that terrified woman fleeing St. Louis, so certain her life was over? How had tragedy and fear led her here to this man, this place, this moment of perfect peace? "What are you thinking?" Noah asked, noticing her introspection. Sarah smiled, turning in his arms to face him. "I'm thinking about journeys," she said. "About how the worst day of my life, the day I had to run from everything I knew, led me to the best days I've ever had here with you." Noah's eyes, the color of a winter sky, softened with understanding. "Life's strange that way," he said. "When Thomas died, I thought it was the end of everything. Couldn't see a future beyond grief." His hand moved to rest lightly on her still flat stomach, a gesture of wonder and protection. "Never imagined I'd have this again, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving." Sarah covered his hand with her own, the simple gold band on her finger catching the firelight. "I want to ask you something," she said, an idea that had been forming for weeks, finally crystallizing. "If the baby is a boy, I'd like to name him Thomas, to honor your brother, to continue his memory." Emotion washed over Noah's face, too complex for a single name: grief and gratitude, loss and hope, the past and future meeting in a single moment. "I'd like that.
he said, his voice rough. And if it's a girl, Sarah had thought about this too, about the women who had shaped her journey to this place. Eleanor, she said, after Mrs. Holbrook. Noah nodded approval in his eyes. Thomas or Eleanor? He said the name's a benediction, a promise. Either way, loved beyond measure. Beyond measure, Sarah echoed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, sealing the promise between them. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing the boundaries between earth and sky, between what had been and what could be. Inside, a man and woman who had thought themselves destined for solitude embraced the family they were creating, the future they were building together. And in Red Bluff, as lamps were lit against the early winter darkness, the small community continued its own journey, changing, growing, welcoming new life while honoring what had come before. The school would open in the spring, bringing education and opportunity to children who might otherwise have gone without. The boarding house would continue to offer shelter to travelers and newcomers. Mrs. Holbrook's stern kindness guiding those who, like Sarah, needed a place to heal and begin again. This was the true legacy of the open range, not just the land itself, wild and beautiful and demanding, but the people who made their lives upon it. People who faced hardship with courage, who built community from shared struggle, who found in each other the strength to endure, to hope, to love. As twilight deepened into full night, Sarah and Noah moved away from the window back toward the hearth, where the fire burned bright against the gathering cold. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: wood, to chop water, to haul lessons, to plan a future, to build log by log, day by day. But tonight, in this moment, they had everything they needed: warmth, shelter each other, and the promise of new life when spring returned to the mountains of Wyoming. And for two people who had once believed themselves broken beyond repair, this quiet happiness was miracle enough. 5 years passed, the seasons turning in their ancient rhythm, each bringing its own joys and challenges to the Sullivan homestead. The cabin expanded first with a proper bedroom for Thomas, born on a summer night, with Mrs. Holbrook serving as midwife. Then with a larger kitchen where Sarah could teach the boy his letters while preparing meals. Finally, with a small study where Noah could work on his architectural drawings, his reputation as a builder growing steadily throughout the county. The school flourished under Sarah's guidance, drawing children from as far as 20 miles away, some boarding in town during the week, to receive an education their parents had never had the opportunity to pursue. The simple one-room structure Noah had originally designed soon proved inadequate, and a second room was added, then a small library stocked with books purchased with funds raised by the community. Red Bluff itself grew, attracting new settlers drawn by the promise of land opportunity, and a community that valued education and cooperation. The boarding house was rarely empty, Mrs. Holbrook maintaining her exacting standards while secretly enjoying the vitality the newcomers brought to her establishment. Life wasn't without its sorrows. The winter Thomas turned 3 was particularly harsh, a prolonged cold snap claiming the lives of several elderly residents, including Hanson the blacksmith, whose absence left a void in the community. Sarah suffered a miscarriage the following spring, a loss that dimmed her usual brightness for months afterward, until Noah's steady support and Thomas's innocent joy gradually restored her spirits. But through it all, through the cycle of birth and death, plenty and scarcity, joy and sorrow, the bond between Sarah and Noah only strengthened. They grew together, changing without growing apart, each challenge faced as partners, each triumph sweeter for being shared. It was on a clear autumn day, with the aspens turning gold on the hillsides, that the stagecoach brought an unexpected visitor to Red Bluff. Sarah was at the school overseeing the older children's history lesson, while the younger ones practiced their letters when Mrs. Holbrook appeared at the door, an unusual occurrence during school hours. "You're needed at the boarding house," she said without preamble, her expression giving nothing away. "I'll watch the children until you return." Concerned, Sarah handed over her lesson plans and hurried down the main street to the boarding house. Had something happened to Noah, who was working on a new ranch house several miles outside town? Was Thomas ill? He had been visiting Mrs. Holbrook. That morning, as he often did, the older woman, having developed a surprising softness for the curious, solemn-eyed boy who reminded her of her own lost son. But when she entered the boarding house, she found Thomas safe and sound, sitting at the dining room table, with a glass of milk and a plate of Mrs. Holbrook's special molasses cookies reserved for only the most honored guests. Across from him sat a young woman Sarah had never seen before, perhaps 17 or 18, with honey-blonde hair and eyes that seemed oddly familiar. The girl looked up as Sarah entered, her expression shifting from nervous anticipation to something like awe. "Mrs. Sullivan?" she asked, rising from her chair. "Yes," Sarah confirmed, puzzled by the stranger's evident emotion. "I'm Sarah Sullivan." The girl took a step forward, then hesitated, her hands twisting together in a gesture of anxiety. "My name is Emma Reed," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alexander Reed was my father." Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet, the past rushing in, like a tide she had thought long receded. "Reed," she repeated, unable to process what this might mean. Emma nodded her eyes. Alexander's eyes, Sarah now realized, pleading for understanding. "I've been looking for you for months," she said. "Ever since my father died in prison last winter. I found his journals, his records of what he did to you, to others." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I needed to find you to tell you how sorry I am for what he did. And to thank you." "Thank me," Sarah echoed, still struggling to comprehend this unexpected connection to a past she had worked so hard to put behind her. "If you hadn't exposed him, made him face justice, he would have continued hurting people, would have continued teaching me that using others was just how the world worked." Emma's voice strengthened with conviction. "You saved me from becoming like him, Mrs. Sullivan, and I needed you to know that." Sarah sank into a chair, emotions too complex for names washing through her. "How did you find me?" she asked finally. "It wasn't easy," Emma admitted. "Father never mentioned your name in his journals, just called you the teacher. But there were references to Wyoming to a trial. I wrote to every county courthouse in the territory until I found the records of his arrest here in Red Bluff." Thomas, who had been listening to this exchange with the intense concentration of a 4-year-old trying to understand adult matters, suddenly spoke up. "Are you a bad person, like in Mama's stories?" he asked Emma, his small face serious. "The man who was mean to Mama before Papa found her." Emma looked startled, then genuinely distressed. "No," she said quickly. "At least I hope not. I'm trying very hard to be a good person, to be nothing like my father." Sarah, recovering her composure, reached out to touch her son's hand. "Emma is not a bad person, Thomas," she assured him. "She's a brave young woman who has come a very long way to make things right." She looked up at Emma, seeing beyond the superficial resemblance to Alexander, noting instead the determination in her posture, the honesty in her gaze. "That takes courage." Relief washed over Emma's face. "I wasn't sure how you'd receive me," she admitted. "I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd turned me away." "In this house we don't judge people by their father's sins," came Mrs. Holbrook's voice from the doorway. She entered with a tea tray, her expression softer than usual. "We judge them by their own actions, their own hearts." Sarah nodded agreement, a decision forming as she studied the young woman before her. "How long were you planning to stay in Red Bluff?" Emma looked uncertain. "I'm not sure. I have enough money for a few days at the boarding house, then I'll need to find work somewhere. Keep moving. And what are your skills? What would you like to do with your life? A spark of enthusiasm lit Emma's face. I love to read to learn. Father never approved of education for women, but I taught myself whenever I could. History, literature, mathematics, anything I could find. She ducked her head, embarrassed by her own passion. Silly dreams, perhaps. Sarah exchanged a glance with Mrs. Holbrook, a silent communication passing between them. Not silly at all, Sarah said. As it happens, the school here is growing rapidly. I've been looking for an assistant, someone to help with the younger children while I focus on the advanced students. Hope bloomed in Emma's eyes, quickly tempered by caution. You would trust me with your students, knowing who my father was, what he did. I would trust the woman sitting before me now, Sarah said firmly. The one who traveled hundreds of miles to make amends for wrongs she didn't commit. The one who wants to break the cycle of harm her father perpetuated. She smiled gently. That woman would be an excellent example for our children. Tears filled Emma's eyes, spilling over onto cheeks flushed with emotion. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Except, thank you. I'll work hard, I promise. I won't let you down. I believe you, Sarah said, and found that she did completely. Mrs. Holbrook cleared her throat, her practical nature reasserting itself. Well, that's settled then. Miss Reed will stay at the boarding house until she finds more permanent accommodations. The room at the end of the hall should suit, I think. She looked at Emma appraisingly. You'll need proper clothes for teaching. We can see to that tomorrow. As Mrs. Holbrook bustled about making arrangements with her usual efficiency, Sarah sat back observing the young woman who had just become part of their community. There was a symmetry to it that felt right. Somehow, the daughter of the man who had once tried to destroy her, now finding redemption under her guidance. It was what Red Bluff did best, after all, offering second chances, new beginnings, a place to heal and grow beyond past wounds. It had done that for Sarah, for Noah, for Mrs. Holbrook herself. Now it would do the same for Emma Reed, a young woman determined to write her own story free from the shadow of her father's crimes. Later that evening, when Noah returned from his work site, Sarah told him everything. Watching his expressive face cycle through surprise, concern, and finally, thoughtful acceptance. You're sure about this? He asked, not challenging her decision, but seeking to understand it fully. Having her here won't bring back painful memories. Sarah considered the question seriously, respecting Noah's concern for her well-being. It did at first, she admitted. Hearing the name Reed again, seeing Alexander's eyes in her face. But then I saw beyond that, saw her for herself. She reached for Noah's hand, drawing strength from his touch, as she always had. She's not her father, Noah. She's fighting to be something better, something more. How could I not help her do that? Noah nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face. That's why I love you, he said, his voice warm with admiration. Your heart, your capacity for compassion, even after everything you've been through. Not despite what I've been through, Sarah corrected gently. Because of it. I know what it means to need a second chance, to want to start over somewhere new. She squeezed his hand. We all do in different ways. Noah drew her into his arms, his embrace as secure and comforting as it had been from the first. You're an extraordinary woman, Sarah Sullivan, he murmured against her hair. And I'm the luckiest man alive to call you my wife. Outside their window, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. Another day ending, another beginning, just over the horizon. Within the walls of their home, a family that had been forged through hardship and love, prepared for whatever tomorrow might bring, secure in the knowledge that they would face it together. And in Red Bluff, the small community that had welcomed a frightened woman years ago continued to grow, to change, to offer shelter to those who needed it most. This, too, was part of the legacy of the open range, this capacity for renewal, for second chances, for finding family, not just in blood but in shared purpose and mutual care. For Sarah and Noah Sullivan, standing together in the home they had built both physically and emotionally, it was legacy enough. More than enough. It was everything.